We can, but I have to turn you up. So let's do a little more testing.
Okay, just let me know if, do you want me to keep talking or?
Okay, for those of you sitting at the front of the room, Ms. Atkinson, can you try it again? We were
Yes,
talking.
is this better?
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ella. We're going to go ahead and go down the assembly line, and not starting with Mr. Bryson. I will start with Madam Mayor. Let's do a sound check on all the microphones.
Remember to speak into the mic.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to say that too.
Sound check, sound check. Closer,
Mr. Smith.
closer.
I think that sounds good.
Very good. Ditto, ditto.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, thank you. Ms. Wall,
How's this?
can you guys hear him in the back? Ms. Wall, try it again one more time.
What about this? No?
Okay, I'm seeing
Okay.
heads yes and no in the front. Okay, Ms. Hughes Candies.
Housing. Hot mic.
Okay, could you guys hear Ms. Hughes Candies? Okay, Mr. Bryson.
Level.
Okay, so for those of you in the front, two suggestions. Don't sit in the front, sit near the back, near the speaker. Or we have a pocket talker that I just tested out in our previous meeting, and it's an amplifier. So it's going to hear whatever's being said in the room. If there's 20 conversations going to go on all at the same time, you're not going to be able to hear very well. But what's coming over the speaker is easiest to hear when you're closer to the speaker, if that makes sense. Sorry, thank you very much for your understanding and help with this wonderful room setup.
Madam Clerk, if I may add one thing, because I am becoming slightly hard of hearing, and if I could say to my fellow assembly members, it's really important to be facing the audience when you're talking, because whether people know it or not, we often read lips. And if you're not facing the audience, or if your hand is on your mouth, it's really hard to read lips. So just letting you know.
Deputy Clerk and Mr. Allen, are you guys ready at the tech station?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We do still have some people signing up, but otherwise we can hit record and we are ready in the back here.
We will bring the special assembly meeting to order for June 3rd, 2024. Ms. Hale, would you do the land acknowledgement, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gurushish.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Here.
Mr. Bryson,
Present.
Ms. Wall,
Present.
Walaki Doc is absent. Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Ms. Atkinson,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Hill,
Here.
and Mayor Weldon. A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we will consider the agenda approved. Next, we'll have public participation on Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, first we will have Doreen Lorenz. Please come up and come to the mic. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes. And you have to hit the little button to turn it green. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Doreen Lorenz. I live out in the valley, and I'm here as the president of the Juneau Igloo of the Pioneers of Alaska, talking about some amazing women, one in particular, who started Juneau. Cheers to that. Ann Webster should be the patron saint for all working Alaskan mothers. Like many of us, she was descended from a long line of seafaring men. Anna was married at 23 years old, a spinster back in those days, and gave birth to 5 daughters, including a set of twins. In the space of 3 years, she lost 3 of her children, and then her husband died when he was hit by a falling tree. She remarried 2 years later and lost that husband months before her second set of twins were born, and only one of those children survived. So what did Anna do? She packed up her 3 little baby girls, all still in diapers, and made her way to the little town of Douglas in 1904. If you can imagine traveling with 3 baby girls without even disposable diapers in 1904, you can appreciate what a woman she was. Anna had grit, resilience, and what was now what we would call an early adopter of emerging technology. At a time when widows were school teachers or governesses or prostitutes, within a year of hitting Douglas Dock, Anna became the head of the Douglas Telephone Exchange, the first woman in the country, perhaps even the world, to have such a high regard. 5 years later, she married Edward Webster on August 20th, and she and her girls joined him in their ever-expanding multifamily business home, the namesake of Telephone Hill, which he built prior to Juneau being laid out. Their grandson, Edward Hurley, lived in the house when it was taken up by the government in the 1980s. I was lucky enough to tour this building last month and was really surprised. The exterior needs some replacement shingles, but the well-maintained interiors of this building are some of the finest you will see in town. It's easy to see why it is the oldest continuously occupied home in Alaska. Anna thought it was important to preserve the history of Juneau, so she added her signature to the charter of the Juneau Igloo of the Pioneers of Alaska and dedicated her life to the betterment of the people of the Juneau-Douglas area and keeping the history of Alaska. Thank you for allowing me to share this exceptional individual with you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Next, we have Tony Tings. Please state your name and area of your town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Tony Tangs. I live downtown. I have spoken before about Telephone Hill. I understand that this evening on the docket is you're going to vote for on $1 million to be appropriated towards the redevelopment of Telephone Hill. I just want to remind everyone of the almost hidden hand behind this project. It's 2.5 years ago when you guys voted unanimously to put the redevelopment of Telephone Hill as a legislative priority. It was number 9 then. Without any public input, there were no committees, no panels, zero input. And you guys voted unanimously to demolition the oldest neighborhood in Juneau. And this has been going on consistently with this body, voting to put it in the 1% sales tax for something that no one could possibly vote against when we're dealing with childcare and everything else. So it makes it look like there's a consensus about this. The process of doing the evaluation and study, that was a flawed process as well. And so I just want to remind you of this. You don't get many chances to hang on to your history and to preserve it and remember it. And it's a precious thing that we have in the heart of Juneau. if you go ahead and develop this projects in the heart of Juneau, and that's what it could turn into, you better make sure you have some suicide balconies in those apartments because you're going to need them.
Thank you. Any questions for? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Skip Gray. Please state your name and area your town live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Skip Gray, and I live in the Twin Lakes area. And I just want to speak to the $1 million of temporary sales tax for the redevelopment of Telephone Hill. And that's a pretty broad statement, the redevelopment of Telephone Hill. And it would be nice to have some more details about exactly what of that money is going to be spent for what. Right now, there's people that live on the hill that keep thinking their house is going to be torn down practically any day. I don't know how much of that money is meant towards demolition of the houses, but it would be nice if you could put more details about what this money exactly will do and some kind of a timeline for when things would happen. My understanding is the huge development that you're talking about that costs $52 million of new housing is going to take years to get together. And meanwhile, the people that live up there should not be fearing for their lives, so to speak, that their houses are going to be torn down anytime soon, unnecessarily. I would request that you use none of that money for demolition until you have a concrete plan for construction of the new houses the new housing you're hoping to build there, both the funding and the plan to build them before you even think about demolishing any of the homes on the hill. And my experience is it could be years yet before anything really happens up there. And so it'd just be nice to have better communications about what your expectations are surrounding the timeline for this entire project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gray? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Paige Bridges. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Paige Bridges, and I live on Carroll Way downtown. And thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And so on Carroll Way, that whole area was excavated around us. And it took many, many years to recover from the excavation. Excavations are just very difficult to deal with for the public. So I'm asking you to delay deciding on funding to excavate this area until, like Skip said, until you have a plan. Because I'm still hoping to save Telephone Hill as a historic district. I'm hoping that, well, first of all, if you excavate the area and nothing happens soon, then you have all the people who work in the government, all the visitors, all the residents of Juneau who just see this mess there. And it is very, very upsetting. It's like a huge wound, not only to the ground and to the community, but to the people. It just feels like an open wound. It took me years and years to recover from the excavation in our area. I mean, I literally got sick from it. And I believe that Juneau would be a less attractive place to live in without Telephone Hill. We really need peaceful byways. Like, we have Gastineau Avenue where I am, and that's so important to tourists. Some of them come running up and say, where can I walk where it's peaceful? Well, we have this beautiful, peaceful place to walk through on Telephone Hill. And we need our beauty, we need our character, we need these old houses history is dead if it doesn't have some living examples of history. And every city that I've ever heard of tries to either maintain or restore its history. And I say that even if it costs money to restore and maintain these houses, it's worth it. Like I'm restoring the old Tanaka house on Carroll Way. It was built in 1913, very famous house from empty chair fame. And it's going to cost a fortune, but it's worth it. It means everything to me and to Juneau. So we really need the peace and quiet and beauty and history that Telephone Hill affords us. And I truly believe that if you vote to tear it down, that you will also miss it. And I'm praying for a good solution in historic preservation. And thank you, my friends.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Bridges? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have William Quayle. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
William Quayle, 415 Willoughby, number 305. The state business, our state business license for being a pedicab driver says we can operate any place in the state, and we can operate at night. Now, the certificate of convenience eliminates our ability to operate any place in the state. We can only operate just downtown. And right now, it's so restrictive, we cannot even if we get a ride for a place like Treadwell Mine, we can't even accommodate a person with the threat of having a $300 fine. I'm trying to get it so it's updated, so because we do have the ability to use electric assist, and we can travel a lot farther than the present. And it's definitely to our advantage to get this done. And I brought this up several times with the assembly. It's about time we get some done. I mean, and I'm at the point where if you don't do anything, you're going to lose money. Okay, and I'm putting to you straight. All I have to do is tell my niece, go ahead and file, and there we are. We're gonna settle this situation in court. Your reasoning for not being safe does not hold water, and it would lose definitely big time in court. And when it comes to it's just that we're trying to get you to make a meeting with me and Jim Houck to actually sit down and get this thing situated where there's we have almost the same rights as a taxi. And a taxi, the only thing we can, when it comes to a pedicab difference is we can't operate on the freeway, which I don't want to operate on the freeway anyhow. It's too dangerous. But when it comes to safety, I like to be able to test the city that it's not that dangerous operating at night. It's not. And you're not doing anything does not hold water.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Quayle? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have James Hook. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is James Houck, and I live on Douglas Island in West Juneau. I've been running a pedicab business here in Juneau since 2016. My pedicabs are all green. We run 4 pedicabs per day, and my drivers make life-changing money. They're all between 18 and 65 years old. We love the community. We love doing business here. I have no issues with what Mr. Quayle is trying to get done. With my master's degree in public policy from Princeton University, I can tell that he's going about it in kind of a strange way by threatening people, etc. You will never see my company operate at night. We're not asking to open up the boundaries. We're having a great time operating as is, and I would hope that you as assembly members would understand that there are 2 companies working downtown. My company is happy with things the way that they are. I had a hand in designing the rules and regulations when we set up, and I don't need anything changed for me, but I have, again, no issues if Mr. Quayle wants to run at night or run his pedicab over to North Douglas. But mine will never do that. We don't see an issue to do or a reason to do that. That's all I have. Thank you for your time, Madam Mayor and Assembly members.
Thank you. Ms. Wall, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this is what you said, but just to confirm, are there only 2 pedicab companies operating in Juneau that you're aware of?
There are only 2 pedicab companies operating in Juneau that I'm aware of. I run 4 pedicabs a day, and Mr. Quayle runs 1. He has 2, but I've never seen him run 2 at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Hout. I have a question too. In the summer months, the only thing that stops you is daylight, correct? Or is there actual time that we have to stop you?
The rules as they're written say that we have to operate in daylight hours. I've taken it upon myself to define daylight hours as 30 minutes before sunrise until 30 minutes after sunset. That's the same way most states define daylight hours for their hunting systems, and I've gotten no argument. We rarely push the boundaries. If we are out before 9 o'clock in the morning, we sit and watch joggers and people with pre-booked tickets walk by us for 2 hours. And if we're out beyond 7 o'clock at night, it is a very rare opportunity to land a tour or a ride. Most people are already where they want to be by then.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Hout.
Thank you very much.
Okay, for that, I have, unless somebody start a new sign-up list, that's what I have for non-agenda items. So with that, we will move to a public hearing with the first ordinance. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-03, version B, an ordinance establishing the rate of levy for property taxes for calendar year 2024 based on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance establishes the mill rates for property taxes for 2024, which funds a significant portion of the city and borough of Juneau's fiscal year 25 operating budget. The charter requires the Assembly to adopt by ordinance the tax levies necessary to fund the budget before June 15th. The mill levies presented in this ordinance support the manager's FY25 proposed budget as amended by the Assembly Finance Committee. As part of the budget review process, the Assembly Finance Committee reviews, amends, and recommends to the Assembly the final mill levies. For fiscal year 2025, the Assembly Finance Committee recommends a decrease of 0.12 mills from the FY24 adopted budget, resulting in a total mill levy of 10.04 mills, the components of which are operating mill rate, area-wide 6.2, flat from FY24 adopted. Roaded service area 2.45, flat from FY24 adopted. Fire service area 0.31, flat from FY24 adopted. Operating total 8.96, flat from 24 adopted. Debt service 1.08, a decrease of 0.12 from FY25 adopted. That results in the total millage of 10.04 and the decrease of 0.12 from FY24 adopted. An opportunity for public comment was provided at a regular Assembly meeting on April 29th, 2024. The Assembly Finance Committee reviewed the mill rate ordinance at its meetings on April 26th and May 22nd, referring the amended ordinance to the full Assembly for adoption. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed the preliminary mill rate during their April 30th and May 14th, 2024 meetings. I recommend the Assembly adopt this ordinance as amended by the Assembly Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Manager, and I don't have anybody signed up for this ordinance. So we will go to our Finance Chair, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly approve ordinance 2024-03 version B, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Mr. Smith?
Just for a very brief comment, I will sometimes, I think we will speak to things just because obviously we know a lot of work and discussion went into setting the mill rate. But I just, at the special assembly meeting, I just want to say just one thing. We had to get to a vote of 5 to set the mill rate. There was a lot of back and forth. Some wanted it higher, some wanted it lower. This is where we got to. And I mean, I think one just thing to note, I'm looking at a chart showing the mill rate back to 1998, and this would be the lowest mill rate on that chart. So I just wanted to say that. And again, there were differences of opinion on wanting higher and lower, but this is where we got to, and it took a lot of time and work and discussion. So this is the compromise, and I remove my objection. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further objection? Ms. Hughes-Candies?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Similar, just objection quickly to make a comment. I will, I acknowledge what Mr. Smith said. This was a compromise. I just, throughout the process in which we all did a lot of work, I was advocating for a higher mill rate. This gives me some nerves, some pause, but I am not going to maintain my objection just because this is the work of the committee. I just want to note that, since the time that we got that out of finance and we find ourselves here, we've met with our hospital, we have our school board. There's a whole lot of $10 million short going around the city and borough. So this mill rate still gives me pause, but I will not maintain my objection because it is what the finance committee came up with.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes-Candies. Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Objects for a brief statement. I just want to say how this is my last year on the Assembly, and I want to say how proud I am of this Assembly for the hard work getting to this point. Thanks. Remove my objection.
Thank you. Any further objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Next, Madam Clerk, item 2.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-01, version B, an ordinance appropriating funds from the Treasury for fiscal year 25, city and borough operations.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager?
This ordinance appropriates, $532.6 million, I'm rounding, in expenditure authority for the City and Borough of Juneau's FY25 operating budget, excluding the school district. This ordinance appropriates all transfers between funds that support operations, debt service, and capital projects, as well as the associated expenditures within the funds themselves. This ordinance also recognizes $507 million of forecast revenue and transfers in and decreases fund balances across all funds by $25.6 million. The forecast revenue and draw from the fund balance are sufficient to fund the budgeted expenditures. The original ordinance was introduced at the April 1st regular Assembly meeting and referred to the Assembly Finance Committee for deliberation. An opportunity for public comment was provided at the regular Assembly meeting on April 29th. The Assembly Finance Committee referred the amended budget ordinance to the full Assembly for adoption at the May 22nd meeting. The charter requires adoption of the fiscal year 2025 operating budget by June 15th. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed the preliminary ordinance during the April 30 and May 14th meetings. I recommend the Assembly adopt this ordinance as amended by the Assembly Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Manager. And we have no public testimony signed up for this one. So once again, we will go to our Finance Chair, Ms. Wall. I don't think on this one, the CIP maybe. These resolutions. Okay.
We have you signed up for the resolution?
The CIP? Yep, that's the next one. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly approve ordinance 2024-01, version B, and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, except for I'm going to do a quick objection for my statement. As Ms. Hughes Candy's alluded to, we just did have a joint BRH Assembly meeting, and we became aware of some programs that revenue does not support. BRH staff and their board is working very hard at adjusting programs, trying to find solutions, and finding hopefully some other revenue. So we will give them an opportunity to do this work, to take some public comment before we revisit this. So we're keeping that in mind, and we know that it's there. But with that, I will remove my objection, and this motion passes. Next, we have item 3. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Resolution 3052, Version B, a resolution adopting the City and Borough Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 2025 through 2030, and establishing the capital improvement project priorities for fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This resolution would adopt the capital improvement program for fiscal years 2025 through 2030 as required by Charter Section 9.4 and list the capital projects that will be initially appropriated by ordinance in fiscal year 25. The Public Works and Facilities Committee reviewed the preliminary CIP at its March 11, 2024 meeting and forwarded the plan to the Assembly. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed the preliminary CIP during the April 30th and May 14th meetings. The CIP resolution was introduced at the April 1st Assembly meeting and referred to the Assembly Finance Committee for deliberation. An opportunity for public comment was provided at the Assembly meeting on April 29th. The Assembly Finance Committee referred the amended resolution to the full Assembly for adoption at the May 22nd meeting. Charter requires adoption of the fiscal year 25 CIP by June 15th. I recommend the Assembly adopt this resolution as amended by the Assembly Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Manager, and we do have someone to testify on this. Mr. Joshua Adams, please come up. Please state your name and area of the town you live in for the record. I'm sorry you took your headdress off, and you have 3 minutes.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Beth Weldon. My name is Joshua Adams, and I inhabit Auk Bay. I'm a local author, and I work in the housing industry. Katie Custer, you wrote in a letter that it would take about $5 million roughly to do the site prep for Telephone Hill, and that was regarding the capital improvement program, and I applaud you for that estimate. It sounds accurate to me. There's $1 million put out of the 1% sales tax toward Telephone Hill for the proposed fiscal year of 2025, starting in July of next year. Yet there was only $500,000 appropriated to affordable housing and another $500,000 appropriated to childcare. I think those latter two items, the affordable housing and childcare, are the reason that people voted for the 1% sales tax, not Telephone Hill. It's a very controversial issue, and some people are for it, some people are against it. Childcare is pretty much a slam dunk. Why don't you guys reabsorb, just for now, just for the fiscal year of 2025, reabsorb the $1 million allocated to Telephone Hill and be heroes. Put it in affordable housing and put it in childcare, which we desperately need now. The childcare issue is affecting everything. It's definitely affecting the labor market. It's causing labor shortages that are hard to see otherwise. If you guys gave that another $500,000, it could go a long way. Telephone Hill, $1 million? A fifth of the way to a rubble pile? The other thing about Telephone Hill is it's making us money. The people that live there, they're paying rent. And I don't think you guys are putting that much into it, much upkeep. I think they're taking care of it themselves. So it's basically free money. Why not wait until you have at least the $5 million that Katie Custer recommends in the letter as necessary for the site prep? Once you get your ducks in a row, and then think about moving forward with that. It gives you a little bit more time to think about this. I also, lastly, and I'm not here to harangue you anybody about Telephone Hill or anything like that. I'm talking money. because it's something I can relate to. And housing is all about money. You got to think about your bottom line. And our bottom line is pretty much in the red right now. If I'm reading this right, we've got an operating total of 8.96 on the mill rate, and we've got debt service of 1.08. Is that correct? For a total of 10.04. You guys are keeping it down on the mill rate. Kudos to you. I think you've done a good job on that, and it reflects hard work. But we're still 10.75% in debt. That means that for every dollar that we spend, that I spend as a taxpayer in Juneau, I'm only getting about 89 cents toward anything. The other 11 cents goes into a black hole. If it doesn't sit well with you to put that extra money into affordable housing or childcare or education or anything else, couldn't you use it to pay off our debt? Because that's going to bring phenomenal returns. We'll actually be able to be getting what we're paying for. And lastly, in the words of Mark Whitman, I gotta quote Mark Whitman on this. There is wisdom in doing nothing. Just give it another year and rest on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Adams? Thank you for your testimony tonight. Okay, with that, I think we're done with everything here, other than I just want to repeat what Mr. Smith said. Oh, we have to actually move it. Sorry, out of practice. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move resolution 3052B, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Objection for the purposes of a question. Madam Manager, according to your recollection, in addition to what was already appropriated for affordable housing, how much do you recall how much we added on top of that?
Madam Manager.
Thank you. You added $2 million to the Affordable Housing Fund, which brings it, I believe, to 4.6 million for fiscal year 25.
Thank you. I withdraw my objection.
Seeing no further objection, this ordinance passes. So thank you. Now I can repeat what Mr. Smith said. It seems like it's quickly done when we do these ordinances for the budget, but this was long, hard work, and I just want to kudos to Ms. Wall for a nice job doing finance chair, a little bit different process, and thank you. So with that, we are adjourned, and we will go to our committee of the whole. Taking a 5-minute break? 5-minute break.
Madam Clerk, are we ready?
Yes, we are.
I bring the Assembly Committee of the Whole meeting to order June 3rd at 6:49 PM. Ms. Wall, will you please read the land acknowledgement?
We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous peoples of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We're grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunas Shish.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Ms. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Walakinock is absent. Ms. Wall?
Present.
Mr. Bryson?
Present.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Hill?
Here.
And Mayor Weldon? Here. A quorum is present.
Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda? Or I can assume the agenda is approved. Agenda is approved. We'll move on to agenda topics. Madam Manager, first topic, Telephone Hill.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. I'm just going to provide a brief introduction to this topic before I invite our guest speakers up to give the presentation in your packet. If I could have you turn to page 2 of your packet, where the cover memo for this topic is. I'm hoping that as you listen to the presentation, you really keep in the back of your mind the 3 questions at that bottom of the memo. What percentage of development does the Assembly want to be affordable? So we're looking for feedback on how much affordability you want to be built into this project. We also want feedback on the definition of affordability. So traditionally through the Affordable Housing Fund, we use 80% area median income. That's $68,480 for a single person in 2023. So again, the Assembly, the body may say, no, I want a different definition of affordability for some units. And then we also would like some feedback on what development incentives the Assembly is comfortable with. There's a range of incentives that could be built into a request for proposals, everything from land ownership to subsidizing development like the Affordable Housing Fund, or site development, prepping the site for development, which takes away kind of the most risky factor from developers, right? If the city were to take on site development. None of these things are decisions that you're making today, even though the CIP included $1 million in Telephone Hill redevelopment. We are very far from saying the city's going to spend X dollars on the kind of the meat of developing this project. We're still really in the theoretical phase. And it is a little bit of chicken and egg. And that's why I have this min-max scale in the middle of that page. It just tries to use some numbers to try to quantify how much city investment would it be based on a series of assumptions that the presenters will go over to have 20% of the development affordable as defined by the same definition in the Affordable Housing Fund, and how much would it be for 100% of the development to be affordable as defined by that 80% AMI. So again, these aren't numbers that will come back to you and ask for an appropriation, but as we develop a process to solicit interested parties, getting your appetite for what affordability means to you and what incentives you're comfortable with will help as we try to craft this process. So unless there are any questions on that cover memo, I am going to go ahead and invite Nick Drivestein and James, and I already forgot James's last name, but he's from First 40, up to go over their presentation.
Madam Manager, are there any questions on the cover memo? I have one question on the cover memo. You mentioned land ownership as an incentive. What do you mean by that?
That would mean, for example, we would let's say we would transfer the land to the developer as part of the cash value of the development. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Darvinstein. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Nick Drivestein, and I am a project manager with the CBJ Engineering Department, and I am the project manager on the Telephone Hill redevelopment study. Here to give everyone a little update on where we are with things.
I believe Madam Clerk is working on getting that update on screen. Clerk, we can just start if that's okay, or if you think it's imminent, we can pause. All right, Mr. Drivestein, please continue. Thank you very much, Mr. Barr and Madam Clerk. And please turn your mic on.
All right, so just refresh everyone's memory on where we are at with the project and what direction we've received so far. At the February 12th COW, we were directed to continue refining design development option C, which would provide 1 to 200 units of high-density housing on top of Telephone Hill. At the April 15th meeting, we were directed not to include any additional parking in our development plans by way of expanding the zero parking downtown area to also include Telephone Hill. Now, as we continue along with our design development, we're encountering questions based on the mixed income or the diversity of housing to be present on Telephone Hill, mainly around the affordability aspect of that. And our questions here are how much of new housing on Telephone Hill should be affordable? What is our definition of affordability? Right here, we've been under the assumption of 80% area median income, which is what's used in the June Affordable Housing Fund. And also, what sort of incentives can CBJ offer to future developers that would help us achieve this level of affordability? Next slide, please. But before we get into discussing that, I wanted to give everyone an update on where we are with the design development and sort of what decisions have been made along the way since our February 12th meeting that we've incorporated into our master plan. And for that, I would like to introduce Mr. James Breckenhoff with First 40 Feet.
Mr. Breckenhoff.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What you see on your screen is the cover and the table of contents for what we call the place guide, the Telephone Hill place guide. It's essentially a master plan document. We just wanted to give you an update on where we're at. We're wrapping this up as we speak, and you will eventually be able to read it. Nick and folks at the city are also reading through it, so that will be with you shortly. You can see in the table of contents we have we set out the vision, which has been very much guided by the community input we received throughout the process, and goes through and documents I must have accidentally hit it, yeah. It documents the decisions that we've made so you have a better understanding of why things have led in the direction they've led. So that's the vision aspect and the engagement aspect. The development framework sets out, and you'll see on the next slide, sort of rules of engagement, design guidelines for future development so that as we enter into the RFI process and RFQ process and speaking with developers, they have a better understanding of how those decisions have been made and what to look for. This next slide shows some of the high-level decisions that were made with getting to the design guidelines, specifically documenting, things like preserving some of the existing landscape that are on the site. That was driven by things that we heard during the community engagement. Setting out circulation paths, so main access routes to the existing parking garage, and then a potential future stairwell that could link east-west through the site, which basically delineates 4 main parcels that are up for development. We heard a lot about view sheds and trying to keep the development low if possible to protect views to the mountain, so we documented that. We also heard a lot about different types of housing, and Nick's going to talk a little bit more about the numbers on that, but just making sure we have a good mix of, workforce housing and other types of market rate housing, so that it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. And then the site has a lot of topography, so the site steps down in certain areas, so being mindful that we shouldn't just, raise the whole site and just keep it all one level, but we should actually be sensitive to the site's topography. And then the last one is, when you're up there, we heard a lot about the amazing views out to the channel. So is there an opportunity to set buildings back to protect those views to the channel? We can go to the next one. These last 3, these are more like recommendations for future development. I will say, you are going to see a rendering of a potential development scenario. One thing I will say prior to that is that we heard in the community engagement that they wanted a unique neighborhood and not something that is replicating the past, but something that is, we heard the use of the word minor architecture several times. So I just wanted to preface what you will see with that. Anyway.
Sorry, Madam.
Ms. Huskandes.
Could you repeat what you said?
Sorry,
About architecture?
We heard minor architecture.
Minor?
Yeah,
Like
minor.
chip?
Oh, M-I-N.
Thank you.
E-R.
Not minor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got it.
Sorry, yeah. Anyway, so these last few, the development looks the way it is based on these design guidelines and recommendations, and not based on replicating something that looks like something from the past. So I think I've discussed most of those aspects of the design guidelines, and I'd love to pass it back to Nick.
Thank you. Mr. Drivestein.
All right, so back to talking about how we achieve affordability on new developments. So through some preliminary developer outreach and market analysis, we're starting to see that for a developer all in on a development.
You guys have a copy of it.
Oh, perfect.
Turning your head.
Okay, so we're finding out with a all-in developer, in order to provide housing or high-density housing on Telephone Hill, it's going to cost around $400 to $500 per square foot.
100,000. Per square foot.
Per square foot, right? Yeah, no, we could dream, right?
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So you mentioned all in 400 to 500 per square foot. That would include a land purchase or not?
Mr. Drivestein.
Thank you. But based off of our 80% area median income for an individual, they would really only be able to afford a unit that's in that 252 to 315 range. And just to try and make sense of these numbers, the average unit size so far with our development plan is about 700 square feet. So that means at the lower end of an all-in developer, that $400 per square foot number, that's about a $280,000 condo, which you can see on the graph to the right there is about the average price for a condo last year. Now, for that condo to be affordable, based off of that number you see at the bottom there, it would need to be more in the $200,000 to $220,000 range. So you can see that there's a definite gap between what a developer can sell these for and what we would consider affordable. And just for reference, 700 square feet. The room we're in, the assembly chambers, is about 1,400 square feet. So we're talking about a unit about half the size of this room. Next slide, please.
Mr. Bryson.
All right, sorry. I know that you mentioned that would be condo style. We haven't necessarily determined that we were going to want units developed to be sold to the public like a condo, or had workforce housing or legislative housing, something that someone would have to own the building and perform landlord services for something like that. We haven't determined that yet. That was just based off if somebody was going to resale them, not, and I'm kind of asking this question, that was based off a resale, not if we were going to have the items for rent.
Mr. Bryson, that's a good question. Mr. Drivestein.
Yes, that number is for home ownership. We do also have rent numbers, but for simplicity's sake, we stuck to the ownership part.
Go ahead.
Okay, so talking about development incentives, some common incentives that have been used in the past for stuff like this is land purchase or deferred sale of the land. Construction cost, and granting parking waivers. There's also funds such as the June Affordable Housing Fund that can assist in making housing more affordable. But typically what's been effective in the past on these new developments is by being able to identify financial gaps along with developers so that you can determine what appropriate incentives to offer for that particular development.
And now we've lost it entirely.
So I'm holding it up. It is page
My
10 of the packet, but there aren't page numbers. It's the one that has the blue bar graphs. Oh, maybe there are page numbers. It's handwritten.
Right, yes, it's the feasibility analysis is the page that we are looking at now.
Thank you.
And while we work on getting it displayed, I'll just go over basically what it says.
Very good.
Really, we've got 4 different scenarios there. Development requires no $50,000 per unit that the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund gives. So all that to say that even with the different options we have in place for providing affordable housing, there's still a gap to try and close there.
Go ahead.
All right, so we're on to slide or page 11 now, and it's going over the Riverview Assisted Living case. This was a project that recently received incentives to help with construction and complete the project. And it serves as just sort of a reference for us as we start to think about potential incentives to provide for a Telephone Hill development. And just to go over Riverview Assisted Living, that's out there in the valley. right alongside the Mendenhall River. It was a $32 million total construction cost, and it was a senior assisted living facility. And included in that was the purchase of the land and the deferred sale by CBJ, a 12 years tax abatement, along with a $2 million construction grant. So far for Telephone Hill, we're looking at a $52 million total construction cost. And we've identified a couple of incentives so far. Like I said, at April 15th meeting, we've decided to waive the parking in this area, so inclusion in a zero parking zone and not requiring the additional parking to be provided by the developer. But we've also done some rough order of magnitude cost estimates on the site preparation work, which would be necessary for development, and that is around $5 million.
Thank you, Mr. Drivestein. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Drivestein, and I don't know if you can answer this, or we need to have Mr. Breckenhoff come back up. But he had said with his presentation to be sensitive to the topography. I'm assuming that if we flatten it all, it would be easier to build on, but I don't know if the differences in topography would make it more desirable. So that's my question.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, would you please repeat your name so that I can write it down and remember it? Brackenhoff. Oh.
James Brackenhoff.
Brackenhoff. Thank you, Mr. Brackenhoff.
We looked at 4 different scenarios when we were looking at the parking, the underground parking and site preparation work. And in all of those scenarios, we calculated the volume of cut on the site. And that has a dollar value associated with volume of cut. So it's not only smart to actually step the site down where appropriate. From a design standpoint, it creates more interest on the site, more visual variety. But it also, assuming you don't do it too many times, right? It gets too complicated if you do it too many times. It actually reduces site work in terms of how much you're actually cutting into the site. So, yeah.
That makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Brackenhoff. Mr. Drivestein. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question.
All right, moving to page 12 is higher, better. This was a question that we started to look at because with our current design of 3, 4, 5 stories of the variety of buildings currently planned, those would all be wood frame buildings. And being at 4 to 5 stories is sort of maxing out where you can go with a wood frame building. So in order to provide a higher density, which was an idea that was sort of floated around, you would need to change your structural system from wood frame to steel and concrete. And that can become a lot more challenging to build with, mainly because steel and concrete are more expensive materials, but also because of the specialized work that goes into constructing them. So just for the sake of exploring our options, we imagined if one building on Telephone Hill, one parcel, were built a 9-story steel structured building that could provide a lot more units in that one area, but the construction costs are quite a bit higher. We're looking at, compared to our 400 to 500 number for wood frame, for steel it would be 530 to 671, so about a 20% increase. So it would increase the cost per square foot. It would increase substantially the overall cost of the building, but it would also provide quite a bit more units and also provide the opportunity for expansion later in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Euskandis.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. So just looking for a little clarification there. I understand that using those building methods, that would be more expensive, but you can also, with the footprint of the building, put more units within that building. So if you were building, I guess I'm asking math-wise, how does that pencil out? Because if you build a really high building and you're only building one of them, and it's got a higher cost per square foot versus building a bunch of little buildings, the overall still steel and concrete was more expensive.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
The per square foot number is going to be higher for steel and concrete as compared to wood frame. So the individual units would be more expensive.
But, okay. I'm not sure. I'll just leave it. I'll do some math.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think I'm going to finish Ms. Hughes Candy's question, if I may. If we did 9 floors of a steel and concrete building, given all the factors were the same 700 square foot apartments, but you fit 150 into the 9-story building, you're maintaining that if you built 9 stories high, that you would still have a higher per unit cost than if you built a 4-story unit of just wood. Wouldn't at some point we begin to gain economies of scale because we're going up so much higher on and keeping the same footprint? I was thinking that every floor that you add, you're getting more units for a lower cost.
Mr. Drivestein.
Right, yeah, it would still increase the numbers that we have, the 530 to 671 is for a 9-story structure. That would include I can't remember exactly what the additional unit counts would be, but it would be at the same density of what those 4 floors of wood would be. Eventually, you would think that there is a break point where it would become cheaper, but we did not find that during our initial analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, so you looked at that. All right, thank you.
Go ahead.
Just to add on to that, we've got James Breckenhoff.
Mr. Breckenhoff. Yes, please. Excellent. Give us the information we need.
No, I just wanted to, because I've looked at this obviously a lot and wanted to give a little bit more detail. Is it possible to go back to the diagrams that I was talking to? No? If not?
Just tell us which.
Sorry to say the slideshow has kicked us out of.
Oh, that's okay. It's that one.
Page 7. Thank you.
The reason I wanted to mention that, comment on what Nick was going through. Sorry? Sorry, you won't be able to see it? Okay, there's the way the infrastructure is laid out to get access to the parking, you have 4 parcels. And on one side of the road, there's the narrower footprint. And on the other side of the road, and that has to do with turning radius, where the location of the roadway needs to sit. On the left side of the road, the parcels are narrower. And on the right side of the road, the parcels are wider, which means you can get a double-loaded corridor, a building with a bigger footprint. And the largest parcel that we have carved out is where we recommended putting a taller building. We did not think it was wise to do 9 stories everywhere because you'd essentially create like a canyon effect when you're in that space. Just from a design standpoint, it wasn't appealing. If you really wanted to and were willing to cover the costs, of course that would be possible, but it wouldn't be as desirable from a design standpoint, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
All right, on to page 13, the last slide here, going over next steps for the project team. Our plan from here is to incorporate a affordable housing component into our master plan, as well as draft a developer outreach strategy to include potential incentives. As far as our master planning efforts, we want to continue to define our boundaries and parcels and also finalize our wayfinding and signage recommendations. Really, our next step with the developer outreach is a pretty big step because it starts to get the conversation going with what's feasible, what a contractor or a developer is comfortable taking on, and how we can sort of build a plan around that and really start to shape a future project.
Thank you, Mr. Drivestein. So I think what you're looking for now, or what Madam Manager is looking for now, one moment, Madam Mayor, is just getting a read from the Assembly. I know you've got some questions on the affordability component. I have a question. Madam Mayor has a question. So let's maybe talk a few questions before we jump into that. Madam Mayor.
I have a couple questions, but I can save my second one for after someone else. So when you say outreach to developers, how are you doing that? Is that going to be an RFI, or how are we sure that we're getting a lot of different types of developers?
Mr. Driverstein or Madam Manager.
It's a great question. Really, we're imagining an RFI process to start things out, just to make it a little more formal and to have a little broader reach on things. But as far as developer outreach goes, it could be limited to a pretty informal conversation with local developers. But again, just for the purposes of getting to a wider audience, we would be looking at an RFI process.
An RFI is request for interest, is that correct? Or information in, but?
For interest.
Interest, thank you. Thank you. Are there further questions before we go back to Madam Mayor, and then I've got a question? Mr. Bryson.
I have a comment. I was going to save it for when we're in comment phase since we're in question phase.
Go ahead.
I don't necessarily know that we should be looking at affordable housing for this project. It's smack dab in the heart of the most desirable location on the planet.
If we could, Mr. Bryson.
All right.
If we could, yes, sorry, I'm sorry.
That's all
Madam Mayor.
My other question has to do with the 155 units. There were two designs that were really, or two thoughts, layouts close to each other, and one was the 155, and the other one, I don't remember exactly, was it 50 to 100 or something like that? And the very max density to me barely won out. Would this work with a little few more units than 155, or how are you coming to 155?
I think that would be best passed off to Mr. Breckenhoff.
Mr. Breckenhoff.
So the first scheme, when I went through the design guidelines, set out a height limit recommendation, and that essentially kept one of the buildings to 5 stories, all wood frame construction, and then the other 3 buildings would have been 4 stories. And that got you to the 155 unit count with the unit mix that Nick mentioned. In order to get to the higher number, that was when we went to that one parcel that goes to 9 stories.
Thank you. I've got a question, and in a way it's a kind of a question, but also kind of a long-range planning comment. I know that we decided to extend the no parking zone to this project, so additional parking won't be required. But at some point, the assembly and the community needs to actually deal with the consequences of that decision. So we already have very limited parking in the summer downtown, and if we just kind of barge into this project without ever thinking about what that means, I think it's going to cause some real problems. I think there are solutions, but I guess I just think we need to think about those. So as a question, have you thought about that?
We have not put any more thought into parking after the April 15th COW direction.
Super. Okay, are there any more questions? Mr. Kelly?
I'm testing, okay. I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question. So if it isn't, then I can wait. But I was kind of interested in knowing, especially since one of the possible incentives is just transferring the property. What control would we really have? Like we're laying out all of our wish lists. Like we want it to be this high. We want to have this many units. We want it to be affordable, et cetera. If the property is at some point transferred to a developer, how do we continue to have say if this is no longer our land? Or how would we maintain some control? Thank you.
I think this is a Mr. Palmer question. Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kelly. So if the assembly decides that's in the best interest of the community, then we would have to work out an agreement with enforceable tools to make it so.
Thank you. Madam Mayor.
So that just triggered a question on me. So if we worked out an agreement and then somebody sold it after, let's just say agreement for 10 years, and then someone sold it after 3 years, does the agreement follow that?
It can, it depends on how we set it up.
Thank you. Are there further questions before we move on? And I think we're moving on, Madam Mayor.
And the other thing that we talked about a long time ago, and I don't know, this might be too late in the game to ask you this question, but we talked about having one parcel be like a hotel. Is that given any thought?
Mr. Drivestein.
We haven't pursued anything aside from housing, especially commercial building on Telephone Hill after our public engagement sessions. There was a strong push against it.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson.
I have an affordability question. Right now, Juneau has roughly a 0% vacancy rate. At what percentage, 1%, 2% vacancy rate, at what percentage does the vacancy rate lower the cost of rentals as compared to how much subsidy we would have to invest in properties to achieve the same lowering effects?
Mr. Bryson, that's quite a sneaky little question, but Mr. Drivestein.
Right, it is a tough question, but basically, we provided a pretty broad range in our numbers for that reason, just because housing costs can be somewhat volatile. It could be dependent on interest rates, on property tax, et cetera. And so the range we gave tried to incorporate all of those into it, but it's also just a matter of, well, you know, we talked about a 700 square foot apartment. Well, it's different if it's on the ground floor next to the elevators as opposed to top level corner suite, beautiful view. So we tried to just capture all of that in the numbers that we provided. But in order to get, you know, a more solid number, we're just going to have to wait and see what the environment is like when we begin a project.
Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, and I appreciate Madam Manager explaining her little line in the memo, because I misread that totally. But going off kind of what you were saying, so I think, what do we have, like 4 or 6 buildings? I can't really tell if there's one big building. Okay, 4. So we could potentially do 2 having affordable components and 2 not, correct? Or by whatever mix we came up with, right?
Yes, that is possible. It might go into sort of a phasing issue, but that is something that we need to begin developer outreach.
And of course, for the ones that don't have an affordable component, we wouldn't be helping in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are there any further questions before we move on to additional discussion? Madam Manager, do you want to take us into the next part of the discussion, or is that Mr. Drivestein?
Would be happy to.
Thank you.
So I will refer you back to the memo, since we don't have it on the slide.
And Mr. Drivestein, thank you, and Mr. Brackenhoff, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, y'all. This is the memo is just the backside of the agenda, so it should be easy to find. So if we could just get some, after hearing the presentation and getting a little bit better idea on how the project has worked with affordability and tried to kind of lay some groundwork for you. If maybe we could go around and get comments on how much affordability the body wants to be built into the project, and expand that question to not just the 80% AMI, but maybe the, you know, if there's a desire for a different definition of affordability or multiple definitions of affordability, that would be really helpful for the team moving forward.
And maybe I'll just ask the Assembly if we each weigh in, does that work for everybody? And what I'd actually like to do is, because I cut Mr. Bryson off, I would like to start with Mr. Bryson, and then I would like to go to Ms. Atkinson before we go to the rest of the Assembly. So, Mr. Bryson. Oh, Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. You said if we just hear from everyone, does that work for everyone? So I don't know what you mean exactly by that, or I guess I'm looking for a clarification.
Good question. I think what I'm looking for before we sort of get into the meat of the conversation is if we could keep it fairly short, just each of us say kind of where we're at, and then we can start to really kind of negotiate or do whatever. So, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Sorry, I just had a question, I guess. So in this exercise or discussion, we're going to, say what we think the percentage of development should be affordable. I mean, there is a chance that we set a number and then we're either unwilling to subsidize to that amount or that there's not an interested developer. That could come to pass, right?
Madam Manager.
Yes, of course, you are correct. I mean, that's why there's a bit of a chicken and egg element to this. We at some point have to talk to the development community and say what would make the most sense for you. But the idea of getting some feedback now and putting the min-max numbers on there is just to get an idea of the appetite of the body to start that conversation.
Very good, thank you.
Great. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So as I began to say, I don't necessarily agree that we should be looking at affordability for this particular development. It's smack dab in the heart of downtown Juneau, which is a wonderful location for legislators to be able to rent these houses or rent these units. Smack dab in the middle of the tourism industry, which I'm sure would have great interest. We don't need to charge either one of those groups below AMI or a discounted rate. I'm not opposed to setting some aside to be low income. That's responsible as an assembly. However, as Mr. Driverstein pointed out, there are more variables that will affect the price than anything that we can do, even with a very large subsidy. An interest rate would, a favorable interest rate would substantially change the cost of these. And the reason why I mentioned this, we just passed, I'm finishing up right now, we just passed, we gave a loan to Coogan Development, and it didn't necessarily have to have that 80% AMI because his prices just came out lower than if we'd have held him to that 80% AMI. And it was because of the favorable interest rate he was then able to charge favorable below market rates, or he didn't have to overcharge. There are other factors that will control the cost of these units. So if we didn't make that 100% of our focus and get the units built, that will be the benefit to the community, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Atkinson, can you give us just sort of a brief sense of what your thoughts are on affordability and the 80% AMI?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Emphasis on brief. I think that 80% AMI is a good starting point. I think it's not reasonable, especially shopping this out to developers, probably to go a lot lower, though I certainly would like to see more affordability than that. And I do have to disagree with Mr. Bryson. I think because this is our chance as an assembly to kind of weigh in and give our proposal, what we hope for developers to come back to us with, that we should be shooting for as many affordable units as possible, and understanding that there are a lot of factors that can affect that, and maybe not making it a hard and fast rule, but I would like to see as many units as possible be affordable there.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to think of the best words to say in order to keep this brief. I guess my sort of just temperature check for where I'm at for the rest of the assembly would be, I don't think we're ready to do developer outreach. I think we have to talk about this process more. And I think that was a great presentation, but I think that was one, where we jumped from to get to here. I think staff is kind of in an impossible chicken egg situation, but hearing someone say no affordable, as much affordable as we can, I almost don't want to say a number, because then it's, it's like a game I think we're doing the wrong way. So it almost feels like the thumb trap where I almost don't want to do it. So I would like, when we start talking more, to talk more about process and where we could get to tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Huskandis. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm in a similar place as Ms. Huskandis. To me, the conversation, these are big decisions, and I think it is a fairly simplistic way to just say, we want more affordable or we want less affordable, just based on the amount of money we would spend. I think, the decision on what percentage and what the target audience is, those have big impacts on the type of downtown and type of community and type of economic development we want to create. And so, what I would like to do, I do want an affordability component in this project, so I'll say that, but I would like to, get the analysis on the impact of that decision that's more than just how much it's going to cost before I move forward. This is super useful, so I don't want to make staff feel like I didn't appreciate this. I really do, but I think we've got work to do.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I believe I'm in a similar place as Ms. Huskandis and Ms. Wool. I will say that I believe that anything that we're spending taxpayer money to subsidize or to stimulate should have some affordability component. I guess at this point I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. When I was looking this over, I'd had some broader questions on process. I mean, I think one of those was answered earlier. And are we anticipating doing this as a, RFI or anyway, what is that like mechanism of trying to gauge and understand developer interest? I will just go along with this though, just because the staff is asking for it. So I'm assuming it's fitting into the bigger plan and, there's a reason for that. To me, I mean, again, based on the subsidy required, we don't have a tremendous fund balance. These are large numbers. If you're looking at 50%, it's, estimated at $9 million for, to be required to achieve that. I guess with that, I would probably be on the lower end, maybe 20% or a third or something. Just again, not that I don't want them to be affordable. It just, I think, there's only so much money around to be able to do this. I guess, the second bullet of his 80% AMI, the target audience. I don't totally know. I mean, my mind has gone to, workforce housing, which I believe is 80 to 120% of AMI. Is that more of a, an appropriate audience? What kind of target demographic? Again, there's obviously so many different ways this could go. These could be luxury condos. They could, and some of, anyway, it could be, and then I guess, to the third point, development incentives, open to ideas and open to many, but again, we just have to look at the cost of the subsidies. So hopefully that was helpful.
That was. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. This is a tough one because it's very valuable land downtown. At the same time, we want affordable housing downtown. So that's kind of a conundrum right there. I'm probably leaning a little bit towards what Mr. Smith said about the 20% of development, but show my age here a little bit, but I was part of the second in Franklin big discussion, and we put a bunch of restrictions on it, and then we went out to look for people. So I would disagree with Ms. Huskandis and Ms. Wall, because I think you need to have some developers asked what they would like to see and then come back with that and then go from there, because if we don't know what the development community is willing to do, then we can make all these regulations we want, and we're not going to get what we want, which is housing downtown. So, and yes, I agree that there should be some affordable component to it. I would probably agree with Mr. Smith a little bit. I'd probably go to the more workforce housing, but, we said we had 4 buildings. Maybe there's workforce housing in one and AMI in the other, and the other 2 are free for all. But that would probably be more of my thoughts. But I think we need to get the developers in town, developers involved, though I do caution, and nothing against our local developers, but we have seen some interesting stuff from outside too, trying to be a little more creative. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I think an RFI kind of broadens it so that we do have the ability to get some information from outside. I appreciate the concerns about process, and it is a real chicken and the egg kind of situation. And maybe after we're kind of a little further along, we can talk about what specific questions we'd like the Madam Manager to bring answers to us on, so that that can give Madam Manager some more guidance. I'm very much on the, yes, do a component of affordability. Yes, 80% AMI. I'm good with 20%, and I'm good with incentives, whatever those might look like. I will just point out that we have lost, I don't know, a lot of units downtown over the last maybe 15, 20 years. We've had buildings burn, we've had buildings condemned, and those are very affordable units, and we have lost those and we haven't replaced them. So I think that when I think about a vibrant downtown, you know, I want some of the people that work in those cool new distilleries or whatever they have downtown, I want some of those people to be able to live in one of these houses, right? Because that's where you get a vibrant downtown, is you have people who are very engaged in the downtown actually living there. Madam Manager, do you want to weigh in before we continue with this conversation? Do you want to weigh in a little bit on the process question and what you think would help you answer that question for us?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I think you summarized it well. To get maybe a little more feedback on what the body needs to analyze the impact of the guidance that we're asking for tonight. So we're asking for guidance on like how affordable, what's your definition of affordability? And I'm hearing from members, well, I need more information to give that guidance. And if I could get like, is that information a market study on what our community needs? Is that information, information on affordability and what rent would be at 60% AMI or 120% AMI? Or is that more of a process with this body, not a research project, but more of you as a body kind of having those conversations?
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any members of the, Mr. Smith had a comment. Did you want to weigh in now before we move on?
Sure, just to get out of the way. You know, in lands, we did look at the blueprint downtown blueprint. Gosh darn it, I can't, blueprint downtown. And just one of their top 5 actions is like housing of all types downtown. That was, anyway, I've not read the full report, I will admit that, but that was in the executive summary, so.
That's super, thank you. Ms. Wall and then Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Smith's comment is a good segue to mine, because I think what I would appreciate, you know, I recognize some people in this assembly have a lot more experience with housing, and I know we have, housing policy, and I know we have staff who have more information. I personally am on the spectrum less educated in these areas, and so when I make this type of decision, I want to know kind of, okay, if we shoot for this percentage or this AMI, those experts say this is the type of community that we're creating. This is the type of economic development opportunity. This is, is it workforce housing? Is it lower income? Is it mixed income? I'd like kind of some options that talk about that on broad strokes, like, so that this body makes a decision, we want mixed income and that's our decision, or, we want rentals or we want condos, and I would like kind of some summary of what these types of decisions mean in terms of those impacts. I see some head nodding, but hopefully that's helpful. It doesn't have to be a lot, but I feel like I don't want this group to just pick numbers randomly.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Madam Mayor, and then Ms. Candies, and then Mr. Kelly.
So I'll just lead off from Ms. Wall, and that's where I think the market analysis would come in handy, and see what type of housing that we need in Juneau, and especially when we're looking at this piece. So And I did like also to see what kind of rent we'd be looking at for this kind of buildings. So my answer to your questions would have been yes.
Madam Manager, is this kind of feedback helpful?
Yeah, very much so. And, I know that the project did a market analysis. I know I've read recent market analysis. Maybe it would be useful to have that conversation at the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee where there's more time to kind of have a more free-flowing dialogue and then, bring that back to the body.
Thank you. Now we've got Ms. Euskandis and then Mr. Kelly and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think towards Madam Mayor's answer, yes to everything that people are saying, I think would be helpful to me. I know that I had seen and I don't know if that's a market rate study or what that was, but when there was some kind of analysis done in connection with the second crossing that was about, kind of showing, I saw it somewhere in one of our committees or maybe just in Madam Manager's office, but, showing kind of like these are the segments of your population and this how many own and this how many in this segment need, this kind of housing and this is where they land. So things like that, seeing numbers like this is what that's going to equate to, rental numbers and sale numbers, because as Mr. Bryson pointed out, we haven't decided like condo or rentals or versus whatever. And as Madam Hale said, we lost some very affordable units downtown and we've still never replaced them. So we know that that's out there. And I don't know if that would show up on an analysis or not, hopefully, but we also know that just from our lived experience living here. And I think that captures my concern because I actually, like on the spectrum, spend a lot of time thinking about housing policy and, I'm not an expert, but do spend time in the AMI world. And I think out of the 8 of us sitting here, if we were to just start pulling numbers out of a hat, we wouldn't do it in an informed way the same way when we reach consensus on a mill rate. We all kind of know what that means for the city and for the end result. And I'm not sure we all know what that means for that affordability. And then finally, to Mr. Kelly's point about, public money financing a project, then wanting to make sure it's accessible. I think this is what you were saying. Affordable, but it's accessible to all kinds of people because it's affordable. So I wouldn't want to use public money to create something that only, like a very select piece of our population is going to use. And then, because in other policy papers that staff have written for us, you've done things like take examples like, what does a Fred Meyer salary make? Like there's a lot of great Department of Labor stuff that would help us visualize, 3 people working here, what does that mean? Because we know that by our own AMI, it skews pretty high end. So if we're trying to get more young families, where do they fall on that? Do they have blah, blah, blah. That's kind of what's going through my mind.
Thank you, Ms. Euskandis. Those are good thoughts. Mr. Kelly and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. I think a market analysis would be helpful. I'm wondering if, and this comes from my experience living downtown previously and having difficulty finding parking and considering, as Ms. Hale, Madam Hale raised earlier, it is an issue that we eventually may have to deal with. I think it may be an important component of any information we get to look at, what sorts of people would be coming to these units, and would they be using, do they drive? Would they be using the parking?
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. After listening to the body, I wanted to throw my support behind the direction that Mr. Smith and Madam Mayor were going. I could see how having some affordability component would also have a benefit. I did want to mention, though, that 1-bedroom or studio apartments have had the least amount of numbers being built or added. And so regardless of the cost of it, the information that we've got as we've been discussing housing is that there are definitely not enough 1-bedrooms and studios being built. And Ms. Hale, back when I was on the Lands Committee, I thought we had established that there had been roughly 180 units lost in about a decade or 12 years or something like that. Same information.
Yeah, Mr. Bryson, that resonates, and I think that's probably where I got it from, Madam Mayor. And then I do have something to add after Madam Mayor.
So just a clarification on the market analysis, though, we have to remember that we are just focused on downtown and not just throughout the city because this is a downtown project. But my question or my comment has to do with, can we remember to check with the Coast Guard and see what they want?
Oh, that's very good. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to just echo one thing, and you've all heard me say this a lot, that Madam Mayor brought up, and that is the more stipulations and rules we put on this project, and this really aligns with what Mr. Bryson said, the less chance that we have of successfully moving it forward. And this has been demonstrated time and again. I think California is the prime example that we know about. And I also think that this is a decision that we made on the project along Glacier Highway by the old animal shelter, and we've gotten a lot of flack for that because we didn't have any affordable housing component projects before the assembly at that time. And we made the decision at that time, sort of like the rising tide floats all boats, get more units out there, and eventually that's going to start to bring the price down. So I very much think that some affordability component is important, but really, let's be careful not to tie it up. So with that, Ms. Huskandis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just want to add one comment on that because I think that is important and no one has articulated that point exactly. And just to add on to your point, it's important to keep in mind this is the only, and there's a lot wrong with housing in our country, but this is the only sort of profession where we are putting it on the private sector to solve what is very much a community problem. So I just don't want to lose sight of, to the extent that affordability is important to us, that will require subsidy because the philosophy of flooding the market with supply to bring prices down, you can find me 2 out of 3 days saying that's true. And then you can also consult with places where they're further ahead and they'll say, it will solve your housing supply problem, but it will not it will not fix your housing affordability problem. And that is because, again, it is a living, it is a profession. So why would builders be the person to shoulder, out of the charity of their heart, the market does what the market demands. So I just want to put that on the record.
Yes. Ms. Atkinson, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to this conversation. I definitely agree that we're not going to get anywhere near 100% affordability on this. And I hope that no one took my comment that way. I do think that I would like to see a push for as much as we are willing to subsidize and as much as developers are willing to do, because while I do think there is some water in the more supply is better for everyone, it's a much slower process. And we really are losing young families very quickly. And I would like to see as much as there is appetite for affordability there. So just a clarification on my part.
That is excellent. What we haven't gotten to is the development incentives. I don't know that we need to get to that part of the question tonight. I think, Madam Manager, my question to you is, have we given you meat to work on, to take some information back to the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee and move this further along?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Thank you very much for your really excellent presentation, and I'm sorry you lost your screen. I would like to actually take just a 5-minute break so that we can actually get up before we move on to the next topic. We have still a lot of meat on the agenda, so. I call the meeting back to order at 7 a.m. And we will move on to item 2, camping enforcement in some public places. Madam Manager.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I'll take this one, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, Mr. Barr, thank you.
You have a memo in your packet. I'll go over that, as well as an ordinance from the city of Bellingham that's related to that memo. The Teal Street neighborhood, and by that I mean our nonprofit partners out there, the Glory Hall, St. Vincent de Paul, and the Teal Street Center itself, have been meeting fairly regularly over the past couple of months. Pretty regularly as well. CPJ staff have attended those meetings. They've been reporting and continue to report increased threatening behavior from a relatively small number of individuals that disrupt their operations and create a challenging environment for their staff and for their other clients. Just to give you an example, I get updates from them from time to time. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Glory Hall incurred an additional $2,000 in dump fees that they otherwise wouldn't have, that they didn't budget for, needing to clean up things like pallets, snowblower, shopping carts, broken tents, and miscellaneous material that was abandoned near their shelter. So that's part of kind of what we're hearing. They've asked. I met with them a couple of weeks ago, and they've asked us to consider creating a shelter safety zone in the vicinity around their buildings that is similar to the Bellingham ordinance that's in your packet. So if you look at packet page 28, there's a map, a visual of what Bellingham calls base camp, which you can think of as the Glory Hall. It's their shelter, and so they've asked us to create the shelter safety zone, or consider the shelter safety zone concept similar to what Bellingham has. And I'll talk about that, but I'll also note that it is also, the safety zone concept is also somewhat similar, although less similar to our downtown camping code. So some of you will recall this. I think maybe only the mayor was on the assembly at the time. Although forgive me if I'm wrong about that. But it was definitely a pre-pandemic decision-making process where the assembly decided to create a camping exclusion zone, if you will, on private property, which is the difference between this one and the downtown core. The shelter safety zone concept that Bellingham adopted, it has been some time, it was 2020. It defined, the way that it works is different than camping. So it seeks to define loitering, and it prohibits loitering in some public spaces, specifically around the shelter safety zone. It does it, their ordinance is more expansive than that, but it's specifically that safety zone that the Glory Hall and others were interested in. We're a little bit concerned about using loitering as a set of definitions for enforcement in this area, with the exception of some code in Chapter 5 that's specific to airport property. We don't seek to define loitering in our code right now, and it's not something that we intend to prohibit anywhere else. It's a challenging concept, and in some respects it seems relatively simple to define loitering: no sitting, no standing, no walking without a purpose sort of thing. But it's actually really hard to precisely define it, and it's even harder to enforce it in a way that is fair and equal. It's pretty easy to find examples of loitering laws being at the municipal level being successfully challenged in the court system as being too vague, or as potentially having First Amendment concerns attached to them. So I'm not saying that it is impossible to have a sufficiently precisely defined loitering statute, but it's not something we have experience in doing. Something that we could do, another option, is to get more specific about camping and where camping is and isn't allowed on public we have done that in the past. It's something that we currently do a little bit of. You know, though, we know that camping limits and prohibitions are very much a topic in flux right now, with the Grants Pass case being before the Supreme Court, and that decision having been heard, and we're expecting the Supreme Court to issue a ruling on that. Perhaps by the end of this month, perhaps next month, sometime this summer. With the case law that we have right now at the Ninth Circuit level, we can, we think, legally, reasonably implement narrowly tailored time, place, and manner restrictions when it comes to camping in public places. And if we decide to do that, the more narrowly we do that, the less of a roll of a dice it is when it comes to our potential legal liability. So the narrower, the better when it comes to time, place, and manner restrictions. So kind of concluding, our options are a limited geographic camping prohibition similar to that shelter safety zone concept that you see in that Bellingham ordinance, and or, right, these things aren't exclusive. You could do either one of them or both of them. Exploring creating code that defines the types of public property where camping is and isn't allowed. And when it is allowed, the time, place, and manner limits associated with that allowance. The memo offers you a couple of examples of things we would potentially consider, like nighttime versus daytime use, differentiating between developed parks and playgrounds and natural area parks that are less developed, and limits around potentially manner-based limits around specific individuals when shelter beds have been provided and refused. That's tricky, but that's something that's been advised, or something that the courts have indicated might pass muster. So those are just some examples. There are others. The staff recommendation in the memo does offer you a measure of hesitancy, I would say, around the specific geographic area option. And the reasons for that hesitancy are twofold, right? It's logical to assume, I'd say, that we'd quickly be asked to expand the zone. And the more we expand it, the less narrow, the more legally risky, the more potentially challenging I think it is. And that's the second half of it, right? The concerns that we have around the evolving case law, and what we may or may not see out of the Supreme Court's decision with Grants Pass. But it is an option. And then the other piece, of course, is that we can separately or in addition bring you back draft legislation that would probably, just by nature of our meeting schedule, come after Grants Pass, that would seek to define where on CBJ property camping will be allowed and under what circumstances it would be allowed, if that's the will of the body. And Madam Deputy Mayor, just one final comment for the sake of clarity. All of this, with the exception of that downtown camping ordinances, which is a little bit strange, and we can talk about that if there's a need. But besides that, everything in the memo and all of this is related to public property, public CBJ land, I should say. Private property is different, and generally private property owners have the right to trespass individuals from their property if they so choose. And then tribal property is special and legally complex, but for the sake of this conversation, generally enjoys the same status as private property. So the main thrust of this is public CBJ land.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Manager. Mr. Bryson, and then Mr. Kelly.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I wanted to disclose that I serve on the Juneau Housing First Glory Hall Board of Directors, but it's not a compensated position, and so I think in the past you guys have allowed me to participate in these discussions. I was just declaring the potential conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Is there any objection by Assembly members to Mr. Bryson participating? No, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I'm glad that that Mr. Barr brought up the option of having an ordinance that would define where camping is, where it is not, and where it is allowed. My concern with creating a specific zone, and I agree with, we absolutely need to find a solution that ensures everybody's safety. But my concern with a specific zone where people are not allowed to camp is that we haven't told them where they are allowed to camp. So I would be in favor of something along the lines that would specify the types of CBJ public area where people are allowed to camp and where they are not.
Super, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Bryson again.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I wanted to include where Mr. Barr got this from, that this is a request from the Glory Hall. They also requested it from operations in the Teal Street Center directly next door, that there are issues that are becoming harmful to the operations of both the Glory Hall and the Teal Street Center. And so they have asked repeatedly to have some level of protection that they don't have right now. So that's the premise of what got this started. The very providers that are providing this service have asked for our help in the form of a protection area, so that way the services that are being provided are not being disrupted by non-compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I've got a few questions, but I'll start with one just for clarification. Mr. Barr, you were talking a little bit about CBJ land. Certainly, that makes sense that is, if we went with kind of this top recommendation, what we would be focusing on. In the case of the Glory Hall and the Teal Street Centers and St. Vincent's ask, are they asking us to do something on public land or on our land particularly, or they're asking for greater enforcement on a variety of patchwork of different landowners?
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, we are the problem for them right now. It is our land. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that may have answered the bulk of my question. So just as with these different options as you've laid them out, I do share some of Mr. Kelly's concern that, the part that gives me pause is saying don't camp here, but we don't provide a place where someone could camp. I just want to verify that I'm remembering this correctly. Currently, where we left that, if you could just give like a short summary of where we failed to create a summer campground and just in a couple of sentences.
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thanks for the question. Yes. We've, as of yet, still been unsuccessful at finding any site, any location for a designated city-supported campground that would provide services similar to previous summer campground sites. That's pretty much where that topic is at right now.
Follow-up, Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you. So as just a brief follow-up, for example, you brought up the dump runs unbudgeted as an example of that occurred because of stuff on our land that was next to these providers. If our land that was next to these providers received services, would an example of those services be that CBJ would be the one coming and collecting that trash?
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you. We do, mostly through the effort of our Parks and Rec staff, pretty regularly provide cleanup services and take garbage that's been abandoned to the dump. In this particular instance, the Glory Hall is doing a lot of their own, and others in the Teal Street area are doing a lot of their own initiative taking and just doing that work on our behalf. But yes, we do that work too.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and then Ms. Wall. Oh, Madam Mayor, Mr. Smith, and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you. So I hear what the Glory Hall and Teal Center are saying. They're looking for some relief, and we have to remember that this is our 20-odd population that just won't follow the rules, and it's causing us a lot of consternation. But I'm really hesitant on the camping piece. We decided as a body not to have a campsite. So I don't know that we want to say, here's the areas you're permitted to camp. It's more of these are the areas that we aren't going to enforce the rules unless you make us enforce the rules, i.e. getting a bunch of trash or anything accumulated. So I'm going back to the loitering question, which would be seem real hard to enforce. And I'm looking at the deputy police chief over there. It seems to me like you need the, what's the right words, the time, place, and manner restriction, and delve into that a little bit further and see where we could go with that to see what we can enforce, because a lot of this isn't just junk, it's behavioral. And that's what the Glory Hall is responding to with safety issues.
I don't think there was a question in that. Is that correct, Madam Mayor? Was there a question?
My question would be, sorry, I pulled Mr. Bryson.
What was that question?
Yeah. So my question, I guess, would be, can we delve into that and look at legislation or rules about time, place, and manner restrictions for a wide and see if we could get anywhere with that?
Is that relative to loitering rather than camping? Thank you. Mr. Deputy Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. We can certainly try. I'd want to spend a little time with the chief, the deputy chief, law department, and kind of analyze some case law and experiences of other municipalities, but I would say that that is an option.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, follow up.
So the follow-up would be, it seems to me I'd rather go to that area if we could possibly do it than diving into camping again.
She'd rather go with that rather than diving into camping again. Thank you. I believe we have Mr. Smith, and then we have Ms. Wall, and then Mr. Bryson. Oh, after Mr. Smith, Ms. Wall, then Ms. Atkinson, and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Barr, I'm sorry if I missed it. You know, the example you brought up was this, junk or whatever, garbage or something. But I guess I'm trying to understand. It's, reading the memo and hearing you speak, it sounds like there's problematic behavior occurring that is being directed at a person that works at one of these facilities. But it says it doesn't raise to criminal activity. Anyway, could you give me other examples? Because I'm not totally sure I'm envisioning. I'm not sure if I'm totally seeing what the behavior. I don't understand what the behavior is that we're trying to exclude, and why it's not criminal, and then it's just on our property because they can probably trespass people off theirs. Though I imagine there's the enforcement issue, which is complicated. Anyway, help me with that, please.
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. And I might lean on the deputy chief for some of the criminal pieces if you and he are so inclined. But certainly, yes, the example that I gave you is not comprehensive, and there are a lot of behavioral challenges. As the mayor said, with a relatively small subset of this population that is, I'd characterize as quasi-violent / threatening to staff and other clients of the Glory Hall, St. Vincent's, and the Teal Street Center. They do, to the extent that both they and JPD have capacity trespass individuals. Those individuals do get referred to the law department for prosecution when a trespass is appropriate and when the behavior does rise to criminal, to a trespass level of behavior, if you will. But I think if they were here, some of them would characterize the behavior as just very, very persistent and challenging to deal with through the trespass process alone.
Yes.
Okay, but it's not like to the assault level or some type of, okay, it's.
That's correct. I generally am not seeing types of behavior that are rising to assaults. I mean, if they do, that is something that we would move on quickly.
And sorry, just if I may have one more. So it might be like someone is standing on CBJ property yelling at staff that is on their, on their private property, therefore they can't be trespassed. It's not, like I'm going to kill you type stuff. So maybe it doesn't warrant a police call or anyway, it's not. And then I'm just trying to figure out, so then if we had this loitering, we could then back them out to the edge of the no loitering zone is kind of the envisioned fix.
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Your understanding, I think it's fair to say, similarly aligns with mine.
Thank you. We have Ms. Wall, and then we have Ms. Atkinson, and then we have Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The way this is written, I think what I'm reading is they kind of asked for something similar to what was happening in Bellingham, which would be about loitering, which I have lots of concerns around in addition to the ones that you have here. And so, which is why a camping restriction is one of your suggestions. Has the groups that are requesting this, have they indicated to you that that would help the situation? I mean, or are they really wanting the first one?
Mr. Deputy Manager.
I would say they would prefer the loitering option. I did speak with them about the camping option at our last meeting, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think it's fair to say that from their perspective, something's better than nothing. But their ask is for the Bellingham ordinance.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson, and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I, like Ms. Wall, have concerns with sort of both options here, but while we're sort of on the camping ordinance, you mentioned that we haven't had any luck currently identifying a place where we can actually sanction camping for this population. Is that we are still looking? Is that we are looking at certain sites, or is that we are kind of just given up on finding a place?
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. I would say we are at a loss for a site where we would provide services for camping.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson, and then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. At the last community meeting that was held in the Valley by the Glory Hall, there were 34 people at that meeting. There were 15 private businesses represented. There were 5 nonprofits, and there were 3 airport personnel. The common theme, every single business in the Valley surrounding this area has had a crime happen to them. You would be hard pressed to find any business anywhere in the Nugget Mall area that has not had some level of trespassing, harassment, burglarization, vandalism. The list goes on. Their assaults are happening, and that threatening behavior is happening. They'll come in, disrupt operations on the Glory Hall and Teal Street land, and then leave the property. And they've run into problems with being able to, I know the rule is now press charges for trespassing, but if the cop comes there and the guy's not on the property anymore, He's already done the damage. He's already scared off the mobile integrated health unit. They've already caused interference with that, which then is creating more problems for the people that we are helping at the Glory Hall. This situation is far worse than is being presented right here. A crime is going to happen tonight, and a crime is going to happen tomorrow night in the Nugget Mall area around this. It has to change. The business community is screaming for change. The providers themselves are asking for our help now. The situation is worse than it had ever been before. And just, we missed it at one of the meetings that I was going to share with you. One of my businesses was violently burglarized. And it's just a nightmare when you show up at work in the morning and your business has been victimized by one of these very small number of individuals that are caught wreaking havoc in the valley. The community is asking for a little bit of relief here, stemming through the business community and the providers. It would be maybe a little reckless if we did not provide at least some sense of relief or some support to that area. There's a crime wave going on right now. It's just the Wild West in the valley, and we have business owners and the providers asking for help. I would strongly recommend that we explore every opportunity or every one of these options and see what relief that we can provide for that sales tax collecting, property tax paying base of the commercial area of the Nugget Mall. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. We have Mr. Kelly. I appreciate that, Mr. Bryson, that description. Mr. Kelly, and then we have Madam Mayor.
Yeah, I guess I excuse me. I am interested in doing something, in taking some sort of action. Mr. Barr, the possibility you mentioned of having designated where they can and where they can't camp. I'm imagining that in that case, you're speaking to specific types of areas, specific zones. I guess my question is kind of a two-part. Like, can you confirm like that's what you're talking about? And my second part would be, would it be possible to include in that zone, like where it's acceptable to camp, where it's not acceptable to camp? Could we have a specific carve out for that area? Would that be for the Teal Street area that they're requesting? Would that be possible?
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and Mr. Kelly. The short answer is yes to both of your questions. The maybe somewhat longer answer is for the answer to the carve out for the Teal Street area. Yes, you could impose a geographic limitation just on that area. The first question you answered is a little bit more complicated, but yes, the general idea is that we would look at different categories of CBJ land and define in code where from a time, place, and manner perspective, where camping is not permitted on certain categories, right? So in parking garages and undeveloped parks and playgrounds, immediately adjacent to public use facilities are likely areas of CBJ property where we would say camping is not prohibited, not permitted, probably any time of day. And then we would look at other categories or types of CBJ land. And it's possible to frame it from different perspectives, whether you explicitly say camping is permissible in those areas is one way to frame it. Another way to frame it is more of how the mayor was talking about how, we're not going to take enforcement action against camping, even though we might not generally be approving camping on these areas unless and until these certain manner-based limits kick into play, right? So unless and until we see human safety concerns associated with a campsite on these areas where we're not enforcing, well, then we might enforce. And we might have certain notice requirements attached to that where if we're going to enforce and it's not a life safety violation, but, trash has been accumulated that still is something that we need to take care of, then there might be a, 24, 48, 72-hour notice before we go in and do things to give people an opportunity to either care for that problem on their own or to move. So there's a lot of opportunity and flexibility in anything the Assembly might adopt on this front. And I think it is important to also keep in mind the just really rapidly evolving legal landscape, and thinking about that that narrow, well, I'll leave it at that evolving legal landscape and the challenges that I think will continue to present.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Mr. Smith, and then Madam Mayor has a motion. Can you hold the question until after the motion, Ms. Euskandis? Yes?
It's not a question, so sure.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm curious about, just what the city attorney might think about this. I mean, I guess maybe a question though is, are we aware that, I actually don't know how old this ordinance was, 2020. I mean, has it been challenged in court? I mean, the loitering thing seems like the more important piece, or like the piece that's maybe more what the providers are looking for. I'm kind of struggling to determine, like, will JPD be able to actually have the manpower to come and take some or move someone away for loitering when, anyway, I'm not certain. Anyway, but I guess a bigger question is, has this Bellingham ordinance been challenged in court? Are you aware of that?
That would be Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. I am not aware of that ordinance being challenged in court. It's a little tricky because if we can roll back the clock a little bit, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued the Boise decision, 2017-ish. And then the Grants Pass decision was just recently issued. And so the Bellingham ordinance went into effect between those two decisions. I don't have a good sense if Bellingham is enforcing that ordinance, and which may be why it hasn't been challenged or not. I just don't know. But, I'll just say broadly, there's many states and municipalities in the Ninth Circuit that are struggling with this very issue. And Mr. Barr did a really nice job kind of touching on the legal realm on this one, and he's spot on. This area is rapidly changing, and everybody in the Ninth Circuit is on pins and needles waiting for the United States Supreme Court to issue the Grants Pass decision. That should happen by the end of the month. Depending on what the Assembly does, obviously we will look at that decision like every other community with a fine-tooth comb and try to analyze it and understand it. I think we'll see across the Ninth Circuit a number of communities that try to do different things. And I think what the manager's office is talking about tonight is one of those types of conceptual ideas where the municipalities try things, and then none of them are going to be perfect, and we're all going to be learning and watching from each other.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Madam Mayor, did you have a motion?
I do, and apologize as we're getting up there in time. So I'm just building off what Mr. Barr just said. So my motion would be to direct staff to draft legislation at what a time, place, and manner restrictions would look like borough-wide. And Madam Deputy Mayor, if I could speak to it.
Yeah, and can you say, like, time, place, and manner for what?
What time, place, and manner restriction, did I forget the word restriction? Sorry, it's getting late for me. Would look like borough-wide, because I think this deals with both, so I'm sending my thoughts to the attorney, poor camping, and it would also maybe deal a little better with the loitering part of it. That's what my thoughts were on that. But I have a little trouble with the geographic prohibition, and so I think that if we can define this a little bit better, we might be able to get somewhere.
Madam Manager, I'm just going to ask, so you are talking about time, place, and manner restrictions in terms of behavior?
In terms of behavior, but it also is behavior with camping.
With camping, okay.
I think it can cover a pretty broad range, and I think we should try and do something like that instead of just piecemealing little bits here and there.
That sounds good. And are we okay with discussion first before we ask staff to weigh in? Okay. I think Ms. Wall had her hand up. No? Oh, Ms. Uscandi's, and then Ms. Wall.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think I guess I'll just say the first camping ordinance, the downtown camping ban, is the first thing that ever got me into this assembly chamber to testify against it. And probably in some thread way is responsible for me being here now. So I have real concerns. I understand we're at a loss with trying to create a campground, but I'm completely familiar. It is something many states are struggling with. Many states are struggling with, and with the current legal opinions being such as they are, I just don't know that it makes sense. I have discrimination concerns primarily, so I mean, like, that's right at the top of the list. So I'd want this to, be. I think this is a major SRRC topic. I understand by making it borough-wide, that just to me is we've washed our hands, kind of given up on the idea of obtaining a place where we will provide services, and then we're going to follow this instead. I just have concerns about this being how we direct our energy. And I understand it's coming from the providers, but the providers, to me, what I'm hearing from the providers is no different than I heard from private citizens or private businesses or anyone who is in an area where there are bad actors. So, even hearing, the reason I asked if we do junk runs ourselves on our own property is what I am hearing is maybe that is just that CBJ, and I know it's not just junk, it's the individuals, but I think that we can try to be good partners to our providers, but I think we need to be good partners to our citizens, which includes this population as well. And having a borough-wide, basically camping ban and we've just given up on finding a campground, to me, it doesn't sit well.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm also going to object for some of the same reasons Ms. Uscandi's stated. I definitely think, profiling and discrimination being at the top of my list of concerns. Though I also, where we put our energy question is a big one for me too. We have said that these are our Band-Aid issues, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do things on Band-Aids when we absolutely need to, we do, but what we're talking about, doing anything borough-wide, is going to be a huge conversation, and I'm not sure we'll get anywhere. And I would rather put that energy into the root causes of these things and the ways that we have control over. I am more interested, I do think our providers have a better, if they're providing services to our most vulnerable folks. And so I would be more interested in a geographic prohibition under those because of that, and not for all the other folks that would also want geographic prohibitions. But that's something that I would want to put out there and test and see what people have to say about it before I felt comfortable with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Uscandi's. Mr. Smith, Mr. Bryson.
I just had a question. This issue, it didn't just arise since the closure of Mill Street Campground, it's not just, we don't have a campground now it's an issue. Anyway, what's the time? It's been occurring before that.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Yes, this concern was a concern that's been being expressed by the Teal Street area providers since before the closure of the cold weather emergency shelter.
Thank you. We have Mr. Bryson and then we have Ms. Atkinson. And Mr. Kelly, were you raising your hand or just pointing out Ms. Atkinson? Okay, thank you. So we have Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I appreciate the mayor's motion. I'm going to support it. Juneau is the best at providing homeless services in Alaska. Ask any city, they'll say Juneau does it the best. The having the Teal Street Center next to the Glory Hall is like a magic wand wish of other communities. They wish they could have their service providers next to their homeless shelter. It's just the best way to do it. If we don't set the expectations now, then we start figuring out on the budget how we can be the service provider for all of Alaska, because that's kind of what's happening right now. As we became the best at providing homeless services, then we attracted more homelessness. Those people have come to town, and they have actually been sent out. 190 people have been given a ticket and said, go back to a place where you have other resources. The situation is going to continue to get worse. There's nothing that has been mentioned tonight. There's nothing societally that is coming along that says that this situation is going to improve. Nothing. Everything that we know says that this situation will continue to worsen. That's why we draw a line in the sand now. We get stuff set now. We know that we're moving forward with more housing. The third phase of Housing First is coming. That's the real answer. That's not the Band-Aid answer. Providing housing, supportive housing, is how you stop this. Saying here's a campground is saying that's the best we're going to do for you. By being strict, we are doing the right thing, not only for our society and our businesses and our taxpayers and our citizens that also want to be protected, but saying that we're not going to give you just dirt, that we're asking those individuals to go through our process, because we do have processes set up. And so this is moving us in a direction that is not a Band-Aid, that is a real solution. And it doesn't say whatever you feel like behaving, that's just great. It says to receive services, you have to have this level of behavior that people can work with you. Setting expectations is not a mean thing. We set expectations for our children. They get better for it. We set expectations here, we will have a better outcome. This is the right direction. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. We have Ms. Atkinson, and then we have Mr. Kelly and Mr. Smith, and I would actually like to weigh in on this at some point. So I'll put myself after Mr. Smith. Okay. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I am, for a lot of the same reasons that Ms. Huskanies and Ms. Wall mentioned, also against this motion. I hear a lot about about issues with homelessness and interactions people are having with businesses. And as someone who, worked downtown and, was stolen from and did have some, unfortunate interactions with unhoused people, ordinances like this don't help. Those are in areas where we have anti-camping ordinances. As much as it feels good to say and put parameters on, where people can camp or how they can behave, I don't believe it actually solves anything. And all it does is, put more burden on our police force of, responding to calls that ultimately really will not do anything. And so I have a lot of concerns about that. I have a lot of concerns about potential discrimination. And I'm also just deeply uncomfortable with moving forward with measures like this without offering alternatives like, a place they can actually legally camp or, anything like that. So for those reasons, I'm very much against this motion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Atkinson, Mr. Kelly, and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Even after I think Madam Mayor repeated her language twice, I'm still unclear as to the effect of this motion. I would be interested to hear perhaps either a simpler explanation from Madam Mayor or an understanding perhaps from staff of how they would interpret this ordinance.
Madam Mayor.
I'll take a stab and then staff can help me out if they so desire. First of all, remember this is a draft legislation. We could still weigh on it, and this isn't not against the homeless population. This is against the bad actors. So the Teal Street and the Glory Hall are looking for some kind of criteria that they can remove the bad actors. And right now, the police need some kind of criteria that they can help that situation. Right now, we don't have anything. And my problem with the geographic location is it goes to loitering. Loitering is even worse, in my opinion, arresting someone for loitering. I mean, if you were on a hike and stop to rest for a minute, you might have a problem, or eating your sandwich in the back or something in a spot of sun. So I'm just trying to see if we can come up with some language and legislation that would address these bad actors, not the whole homeless population. That's not my case at all. And Mr. Barr mentioned some of the things, like you don't want people to camp next to utilities. You know, maybe you don't want someone camped in a playground during the school hours. I mean, there's things that we need to look at around the area. And if we get stuck on the borough-wide, we can strike that when we make the legislation. So I'm just trying to get us so we have something to look at that we can do. And if we, at that point, we all say no, then that's something. But right now, that's great if you object, but what's your solution to this problem that Teal Street and Glory Hall is complaining about?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Smith, and then I'd like to weigh in.
Thank you. I think I understand. Madam Mayor, could you repeat your motion?
Madam Mayor, if you can.
If I can, because it's getting late there. So I directed staff to draft legislation for a time, place, and manner restriction borough-wide and bring it back to the cow. It's definitely not going to leave the cow, obviously. So, and just for us to look at.
Mr. Smith, yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm definitely supportive of trying to do something. I don't know. I don't know what level of conversation has happened between the attorney, manager's office, JPD. Like, I mean, is there an actual solution in mind, or are there do we have legal concerns on trying to do something with loitering? Is there enforcement ability? Like, I guess I'm not necessarily sure, especially with, potential action of the Supreme Court, like trying to draft, I'm not sure draft legislation is the right step, but I guess how much have you all worked on this together? Like, do you feel like we understand all the major, like, legal and practical and enforcement issues, or is there more information that you can bring? Anyway, like, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how far along this is, and do we have a solution?
Mr. Barr.
I just don't want to send everyone on kind of a goose chase or something, I guess. And
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Smith, I will do my best. We have had a fair number of conversations about this topic internally. The way I understand the mayor's motion is specific to camping, upon her clarification, not specific to loitering. So time, place, and manner restrictions from a borough-wide. Oh, maybe I'm confusing the issue, but
That was not clear to me, so maybe the mayor can make that clear. Are we talking about, when we say, what are the three words? Manner?
Time, place, manner.
Time, place, and manner.
Time, place, manner, are you talking
Okay,
just?
you guys, hang on. Madam Mayor, thank you.
So the time, place, and manner restriction. So I'm thinking of camping, but I think it could be used also for problems within the center. If someone is standing there, not crossing the bar of assault, but definitely in a threatening manner, I would hope that could be also addressed. So my answer would be both.
Ms. Wall, is that good? Sorry for cutting you off. No, it's okay. Mr. Attorney.
Yeah, I'll try to take this. This is, like I mentioned earlier, this is really hard. And some of the attorneys in the office have been working with Mr. Barr for a while, trying to conceptualize ideas. And that led to this meeting. It led to bringing this topic before you to see where this body was in terms of concepts. we can try to explore the mayor's idea to try to put something on paper. I don't want to get into a lot of the legal kind of nuances right now because I think there are many. And I think if the body says, we want you to work on this, I will work on this with the manager's office and we will try to figure out something. I think we all have the same hesitation. I'm hearing it with each of you that there's a respect that this is hard and topics like loitering are harder than camping. There are behavioral concerns that, we can explore and look at. I will also say, I think there's probably, as we're doing this, I think there's maybe some practical issues that the manager's office and the law department and the JPD can look at the same time with the providers and see if there's other tools that we could use instead of this type of criminal tool. But if this is the will of the body, we will explore it and we'll try to bring something back to you.
Follow up. I'm sorry. That is
Mr. Smith, I think Ms. Huskandi's also would like to speak, but I would actually like to speak because you're good. Okay. So go ahead and have a follow-up and then I'm going to speak, please.
Okay. Is it less work? I feel like I still need to understand some of those legal issues to decide if this is actually the route I feel like we should go down. Is it going to be less work to like get a legal memo or a more, I mean, this is just one page and I appreciate you're trying to bring this concept in front of us, but I feel like it's obviously very complicated. Is it going to be less work to give a more comprehensive memo or to draft an ordinance?
Yeah.
Mr. Attorney.
Thank you. So short answer, I think we need to wait for the U.S. Supreme Court to issue the grants pass decision, but this is the meeting that precedes that decision. So I anticipate it'll happen in the next few weeks. And so depending on the direction from the body tonight, we will look at that decision and try to figure out how to make something match. And, just so we all understand, when the United States Supreme Court issues a decision, that's just the beginning of a long process of courts and municipalities and states trying to figure out how to apply it.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney, and thank you to the body for a good discussion, but it is getting late. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about, as we discussed whether to bring this to this meeting right now, in part, it is to shed some daylight on the issues that are very real issues. And I have family members who have had their vehicles broken into multiple times. I was a member of a church that was broken into and vandalized. And obviously Mr. Bryson has had that experience. These experiences are very real. And so this is just really communicating to those businesses and to our providers and to our community that this is happening and we need to think about if there is something that we can do. I also wanted to just comment, when we try to talk about getting at root causes are 45, 50 years old when decisions were made at the federal level that were then never followed through. And so communities, assemblies all over the nation are doing just what we're doing, which is grappling with an unsolvable issue or a set of unsolvable issues that really should be solved at the federal or state level, and instead they're trying to be grappled with at the community level. And I feel like that is why it is so difficult. I wanted to make one more comment on the junk runs. When they talk about junk runs, a lot of that is stolen property. So what's happening is people are stealing things and then they're stripping them for parts. And so that's the junk runs. And so what ends up happening is somebody has to dispose of that stuff, but it's somebody else's stuff that was stolen from them. So I support Madam Mayor's motion, and I totally agree that it's very problematic. So if we have no more comments, we could take a vote on that. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I appreciate those comments, and I just wanted to clarify one thing. The mayor said we got to do something and offer a solution. If this does not pass, I would move on to the second line here because that's more interesting to me as a potential solution, which would be to look specifically at a no camping ordinance in this geographic area. So just want to put that on the table that if this fails, I could make that motion.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I had a question on that. I'm wondering, like, by making it borough by making it borough-wide, does that make it easier or harder to craft legislation that seeks to prohibit what we're trying to do?
Mr. Palmer? Or Mr. Barr?
Maybe we can both take a crack at it. It'll be interesting to see if we have differing opinions. Mr. Smith, my answer to that question is that a borough-wide ordinance would be more challenging to craft, simply because there will be much more that we need to consider and care for in terms of all the different types of CPJ property. A specific geographic ordinance, I would say, would be easier to craft because we would just be looking at that specific zone, if you will, and rules around that specific zone. I'll of course defer to Mr. Palmer on which may or may not be more or less legal.
Mr. Palmer?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with the overall sentiment. I think what's really challenging is balancing the political needs and the legal needs on this one. I think that's where the borough-wide versus local question gets hard. So just to be more blunt, I think it's really hard politically to satisfy constituents in one specific area with a borough-wide ordinance. But I also recognize there's value in doing that as well. And I can see the opposite happening in a specific ordinance, because then you have the problem of, okay, me too, let's expand that exclusion area out and out and out. And so I think both are really hard.
Really?
I mean, I just don't want this to go down in flames and for us to just do nothing. So, I mean, I want to propose an amendment to the motion, but.
Let me pose to the body, and maybe this is just kind of a nod. Are we trying to do something right now when we have a Supreme Court decision coming in a few weeks that maybe we should wait on? Madam Mayor.
I move to table this discussion to our next committee of the whole.
Is that the correct motion, Mr. Palmer? I think maybe not table, maybe it's postpone.
I think I heard a motion to postpone to a time certain to the next committee.
Yes, you did.
Are there any objections to that motion? Thank you, that motion passes. And we do have 2 items left. I'd like to break until 9:01, just in case people need a brief break, and then let's come back and see if we can get through these. And thank you all. We'll bring the committee of the whole back to order at 9:03 PM. We may have lost Ms. Atkinson. I know she's in the airport. So, yep, she has to catch her flight. We have lost her. So, Madam Clerk, item number E3, bond ordinance on the agenda, please.
Thank you. You have a memo in your packet that was requested after we initially talked about two proposed projects for a bond ordinance this year. That's public safety communications infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure. The Assembly Finance Committee requested additional information on the wastewater project, and that is included in your packet. You will see that the committee was concerned that the cost estimate for a roof on the clarifier building at JD Treatment was expensive at $7 million, but turns out it's the whole building that needs to be replaced, which is even more expensive at a little over $14 million. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no questions, Madam Mayor, do you have a motion?
Absolutely. And I'm going to split this in two just to make it easier. So I move to introduce a bond ordinance at the June 17th regular meeting for $12.75 million for public safety communication infrastructure. And I just want to take 2 seconds to recognize Public Safety Manager Erin Calwar for sitting here for so long and hanging out with us. And I ask for unanimous consent.
I see no objections, and I would like to object just for the purposes of a comment, which is that we can introduce these as two separate ordinances, but that does not mean they have to be on the ballot as two separate ordinances, as I understand it. Seeing no objections, that ordinance or that motion passes. Madam Mayor.
All right, and next I would move to introduce a bond ordinance at the June 17th regular meeting for $10 million for the clarifier building replacement at the Jim Douglas wastewater treatment facility. And do I have to say anything about the structure of the debt? I don't think so.
No.
So, perfect. And I'm going to object for purposes of a quick question. So
Madam Mayor.
my question is, if we do this, how does it affect the wastewater rate that the people pay?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And then I withdraw my objection.
Madam Manager.
Every $10 million in non-ratepayer revenue that's put towards capital projects reduces the amount that the rate would need to be increased by 3% every year over a 5-year period. So you would be saving ratepayers that 3% increase.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any objections? Ms. Hughes-Gandies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just object for the purpose of an amendment, and we'll see what you guys think of this, but I would amend Madam Mayor's motion to change the amount from 10 million to 14.7 million. And to speak to my amendment briefly, we have in our memo all the details of why the cost is going to be higher than we thought, just like the public safety communications. And Madam Manager just spoke to how that impacts the rate, but I feel like if we are bonding the difference between 10 million and 14.7 million, it makes sense for this project. We should just bond for the whole project. And then rates are going to go up over time, so leave the rates to pay for the many other things we need in which federal money is no longer coming.
Madam Mayor.
I'll object for the purposes of a question. If we did it to 14.7, would this go out of our debt service and cause our debt service to increase?
Madam Manager.
I believe we could still structure the debt to fully utilize the 1.08 debt service mill rate through. It probably wouldn't. So I think the finance director would say, and she can jump up here if she disagrees, that we could still structure the debt service mill rate within that 1.08% at that number.
Director Flick is jumping up here. Good. Thank you. Director Flick, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would agree with what the city manager just said, But I would also just like to remind you, as we looked at the debt service projection, depending on other bond issues that you want to take to the voters, I do believe we could structure both the public safety infrastructure and a 14.7 million wastewater such that the debt service mill rate that you approved tonight could be maintained. We can do that through a number of processes, the length of the debt, when we pay interest versus when we pay principal and how much. So I believe we can structure that with these two pieces. But as we talked about with projects coming up, if there's additional North Douglas Crossing, any school projects that we would need to bond for, we'll have to care for the fact that we do still have existing debt, and then we will have this on top of it if it's approved by the voters.
Thank you. Are there further objections? Mr. Bryson?
Objection for the purpose of a question. I know that Manager Kester just gave us a real good explanation. 10 million prevented 5 years of 3% savings or 3% non-increases. Would replacing the entire building provide maybe like 2 more years of 3% non-incremental increases, or would replacing the building have a more substantial savings to the overall wastewater system, or would it not have substantial savings? Could you maybe give us the impact if we replace this building on what it would look like for CBJ taxpayers?
Madam Manager.
The best way to think about it is every $10 million that's not coming from ratepayers is 3% in a rate increase that doesn't need to happen. So I would say over 5 years is 4.5% if that amount's increased to 15 million, if the bond amount's increased to 15 million.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Madam Mayor.
How much money is in the wastewater utility fund balance?
That's on the second page. No, not there. Madam Manager.
For fiscal year 25, the ending fund balance is 6.4 million without any additional appropriation. So this, if we do indeed draw 4.7 million down from that number, it would put the wastewater fund balance, projected wastewater fund balance, because it's just a projection, below the recommendation of 2 months operating budget for a fund balance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. I'm going to object. I'm very cognizant of what we bring to the voters, and I worry that, we've thought a lot about these two packages, and all of a sudden we're talking about, rather than a total of 22.75 million, now it's 26.75 million, and I'm just very cognizant. I think that there are a lot of voters who are really attentive to what we're doing with our taxes, with our tax rate, and I also think that what in my humble tenure here, what I've seen is as we move through a project, other projects have funding left, and so you can transfer it from other projects. There's mechanisms and ways of figuring out how to get these things done. I think taking it from fund balance is a really good idea. I think that might come from other places as well. There's just what I've seen. So I will object. Are there further comments? Ms. Iskandis.
You just sparked a question in my head, just one quick question, and then we can go to it. But Madam Manager, am I correct that we treat the utility different than we do everything else? We sweep between CIPs of other projects routinely, but we try not to do that with the utility. Is that correct?
Madam Manager.
We do transfer funds within the utility just like we do for general fund funded projects, but the utility dollars stay within the utility. So we'll say, hey, we got to do more. This utility project came up and we just closed out this one, so we want that $500,000 to transfer the next project. I will say there is no shortage of projects to fund for those dollars.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, with that, I'll maintain the motion, but I appreciate your sentiment. I feel like the utility has to pay for itself, and so in this case. I'd rather just pay for this project because it doesn't have access to those other CBJ funds.
Thank you, Mrs. Candies. We have a motion and we have an amendment. Madam Clerk, can you state the question, please?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, for the amendment, for the motion of having the amendment being 14.7 million towards the wastewater infrastructure amount for the bond. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Mr. Bryson?
No.
Ms. Wall?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Ms. Atkinson's no longer here. Deputy Mayor Hill?
No.
And Mayor Weldon?
Yes.
Motion fails, 2 yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and now we'll move on to the main motion. Is there an objection to the $10 million motion? Thank you, Madam Mayor. Seeing no objection, that motion passes, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Madam Clerk, CWAC update. No, Madam Manager, CWAC update.
Thank you. I will ask Visitor Industry Director Pierce to come up, but while she's walking up, I want to just let you know where we're trying to go this evening. So where we'd like to get some direction from the body on is a recommended easement and land and tidelands lease swap with the Franklin Dock owners for the National Guard dock. So we're looking for direction from you to begin those negotiations. We're also looking for direction from you on financing the entirety of the CWAC project, kind of bringing back the entirety of the CWAC project, which is defined as Franklin to AJ, filling in some deck overs, taking into account earlier guidance from the Assembly and Fisherman's Memorial. So those are the two questions that we're trying to get some feedback from you on. Both of those efforts would require official Assembly action. So again, this won't be the last time you touch them, and I will hand that over to Visitor Industry Director Pierce now that we know where we're headed.
Thank you, Director Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Recognizing the late hour and the intensity of this meeting, I will endeavor to keep my comments here brief. You've all read my memo. And as the city manager characterized, the two key questions before you tonight are about the easement, and we will need to pursue, if we wish to construct the whole seawalk, we likely will need to pursue some sort of debt financing on passenger fees, and whether or not we want to do one big package to include all of these assorted seawalk projects, or whether we want to just focus on the Franklin to AJ connection. So my memo includes status updates. I do want to give you a little bit of a visual tour of the area so you understand a little bit better where we're talking about. So the National Guard dock property is this little triangle right here. And the seawalk alignment would come from the AJ dock property. There's a tiny little triangle in here that we would need to negotiate with the owners of the AJ dock. We've been in those discussions. Along the Petro property, across the National Guard dock, and then along Franklin Dock property to connect with the Franklin Dock. The owner of the Franklin Dock is interested in this National Guard dock property for a number of reasons. Most notably, there are some strange encumbrances on this parcel that make it difficult for him to develop. And Director Yucatel is here as well and can shed some additional light on Docks and Harbors' use of that property if needed. Currently, it's a old dock in disrepair, a very small uplands parcel. The only current use for it is the Sea Pro spill response boats. You may recall that the Tagish was moored there and sank there. And so in order for the Seawalk project to progress, the current proposal from the Franklin Dock owner is that we trade the National Guard dock property for the easement. That would come with an associated Tidelands lease. Mr. Stoops, the owner of the Franklin Dock, or their representative, would want to lease the associated Tidelands with the idea that there could be a float to park yachts, that type of craft at that location. Then moving up the Seawalk, Petro Marine is currently in discussions with the Coast Guard about safety considerations for their portion of the Seawalk. Those discussions are progressing. They're looking for kind of creative community solutions for how we can come to an agreement. It doesn't necessarily have to be kind of a tit for tat on the Seawalk. They're invested in the community. They want to be here for a long time. And they're coming back to me with some ideas, so that will be before the Assembly in the future. But the big discussion tonight is the concept of the land trade. So I think I'll pause there for discussion on that piece before moving to the bonding issue.
Are there any questions? Ms. Hughes Scandies, start with you.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Pierce. Just to get a sense of, thank you for the visual tour, to get a sense of what that potentially could be, the small yacht or mid-sized vessels, are we talking about like less than 5? And when we say yachts and mid-size, like would that be like an Alaska size, or should I think smaller?
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will, Ms. Hughes Scandies, I will direct you to the final page of your packet, which shows the types of and numbers of boats that could be co-located between the Petro property and the Franklin Dock property along the front of the Seawalk there. Note that on the Petro side, that would obviously only be when the fuel barge is not present. And these drawings at this point are conceptual. It could be 2 docks, it could be 1, it could be shared. This is, I think, in discussions with both parties, the Seawalk is the critical path, and as is getting a mooring space for Petro's fuel barge, and then future, yachts and mid-sized vessel docking is kind of a longer term option that they're both very interested in, and I'm supportive of that.
This is perfect. I have missed this. I looked at the first page, but I didn't connect that this was that. So thank you.
Are there further questions? Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Has Docks and Harbors been involved in this discussion, or their board, I guess, yet, or is that at some point in the process?
Ms. Pierce, do we need to bring Mr. Yucatil up?
I can take a stab at it, or Mr. Yucatel is welcome to come up, whatever the body prefers.
Can we have Mr. Yucatil address that question? Thank you. Mr. Yucatil, can you enlighten us as to the involvement of the board?
The board has not been involved in discussions with Thailand lease trade with the owners of Franklin Dock.
They have not been?
Have not.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions? Thank you, Mr. Yucatil. Ms. Pierce, I have a question, and it's related to the Petro security sort of solution to shut down the seawalk when they're loading. What we've seen over the past some years, 20-plus years, I guess, is there are levels of security that are required, and then 5 years later, there are enhanced levels of security that are required. And then 10 years later, and we're seeing that at the airport right now, we've repeatedly seen that with the docks. So I guess my concern is that we would go to all this effort to build this seawalk, and then all of a sudden there'd be some crazy national policy that doesn't allow us to have a seawalk there. And I don't know that you could solve that, but I guess that's a concern that I have.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I do not have a response or solution to that at this time. I will bring that up with Petro and to inform their discussions with the Coast Guard.
Okay, that would be really helpful. Thank you. See no further questions. Do we have a motion, Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. On this particular topic, I would move to direct staff to begin work on a land swap at the Franklin dock that trades the National Guard dock for the seawalk easement. And ask for unanimous consent.
I see no objections. Ms. Pierce, you have your direction. Move us on.
All right, thank you. The other piece of this is the bonding issue. So Director Flick is here to talk if we have questions about debt capacity on marine passenger fees. We've discussed with the body a number of times that there would be an eventual bond package for the seawalk. Right now, the needs for the seawalk are this Franklin to HA connection, which I have some very preliminary updated old numbers in this document. We would need to get further along in the design process to have a more accurate estimate, but we can assume it's a $20 to $25 million project. And then there are also considerations like the seawalk deck over holes. And we did appropriate some money in passenger fee. Everybody who was in that discussion is laughing. Yeah, we can return to that conversation, or not. And regarding what gets filled, what I'm looking for guidance on this evening at this late hour is whether to proceed with asking Director Flick to research a larger package that includes the deck over projects, would also include shoring up the Fisherman's Memorial, which is something that's going to need to happen within the next several years. And also recognizing we have about $5 million in the seawalk right now. The Public Works and Facilities Committee today authorized transfer to Homestead Park for $400,000. Another thing that I have my eye on for that money is Marine Park. We did not have a final cost estimate when we put together the passenger fee budget. And given that Marine Park is part of the seawalk, I think that's a really appropriate use of some of the funds in that CIP. That will likely, definitely, I'll make sure I leave us enough money for design. But those are some of the considerations that I'd like the body to think about as you give this guidance, that we did put more money in the seawalk CIP. We have had some other projects that were appropriate uses of that money that may kind of get in the way of being able to spend it in the way we'd originally discussed.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Pierce. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Actually, my question is for Mr. Yucatel, because the Franklin to AJ connection, I can see that that's tourism related, but the deck overs and Fisherman's Memorial, I'm assuming that the board has weighed in on these two or support spending money to do those?
Mr. Yucatel.
Through the chair, Mayor Welland. So Docks Harbor's board would never weigh in on Fisherman's Memorial because that's on private land. So there's never been a reason for the board to weigh in on that.
Follow up, but
Yes.
they are supportive of the deck overs, as I recall. As the body
When you're talking about-
approved it last time.
When you say the deck over, we're talking about decking over the open water areas.
Well, I believe there's two and we voted to keep one.
Just for the, if I may, so there's two open areas, one in front of Pier 49. That's under lease to the owner, so that is currently encumbered. The other one by Effie's or People's Wharf is open and not, there's no plans. The Docks and Harbors Board over the last few years has proposed marine passenger fees every year to deck that over, as well as to establish a more substantial USS Juneau Memorial in that area.
Okay, I'll be honest, I don't remember which deck over that we voted not to cover.
We'll get that information the next time we talk about this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions right at this second, and I do have a question about the Fisherman's Memorial, and I appreciate Mr. Yucatil mentioning that that's on private land. I think a lot of us on the assembly and certainly among staff are very cognizant of people taking on projects in the community, people in the community taking on projects, and then all of a sudden they become a city responsibility. And I don't know what the history, I remember when that memorial was built, and I think it's admirable, and I can very much relate to it, but is it really a city project?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't endeavor to get into what the engineering needs with the seawalk itself are and that project. If the body decides it's not a city project, we can just not explore that. I think I would like to come back, if we are exploring a larger package that encompasses multiple things, I think maybe we can come back with a variety of components and have that discussion at that time, at the time that we have an engineer to weigh in on whether it does, that does affect city property.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Pierce.
And just to clarify quickly, my understanding was that it does, and it poses a risk to city property, and that was the reason, but I would like to get more information about that.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions? Or do we have a motion?
I believe Ms. Pierce said she wanted us to wait on this one.
Wait on this.
That's what I got. You wait on this while you did some research on a couple of these projects.
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you could provide guidance on whether to explore funding for multiple projects or just the Franklin to AJ connection, then we'll come back with a discussion of multiple projects or just the Franklin to AJ connection.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Do we have a motion, Madam Mayor?
Yes, I move to direct the finance director, apparently with the help of the tourism manager, to research one large debt package of marine passenger fees for the Franklin to AJ connection and other possible seawalk projects. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Including the Fisherman's Memorial, because it might not be a city-owned land, but we certainly do the ceremony every year.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will object, and my objection is based on the fact that over the years, over many years, we have appropriated marine passenger fee money, various pots of money to build the seawalk. And we've done it, as I understand, successfully so far without doing this big bond package, and it's worked. And it seems like it sort of lines up year by year or every few years that we have money in the pot and we actually can appropriate that money. So maybe I'll just object for purposes of making that statement, and then I'll remove my objection because we'll be able to talk about that when the bond package, when it comes to us more thoroughly. I see no other objections, so that motion passes. Thank you. Ms. Pierce, thank you very much. I think we are on to staff reports, downtown office space verbal report. Madam Manager, we're getting close.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. I just wanted to provide the body and the public with an update on our downtown office space. You recall that we came to you months ago with real concerns about Muni Way and the environment for staff there. Lots of noise, dust, toxic smells. It's just been a very challenging place for people to work. We asked you for kind of guidance on negotiating a short-term lease with the Burns Building to move those 35 employees to the Burns Building ASAP to try to get them out of that work environment. It has taken months to negotiate that lease, and not, for normal reasons like this clause we can't agree with and they can't agree with that, and then we're busy and there's attorneys involved and all the things. So I don't think it's not an ill intent or anything, but the result has been that now we're looking at the construction season almost being done, the construction on the project almost being done. About the same time, we could probably get to any type of moving of employees into office space. Concurrently, we have also had proposals for the Marie Drake building come back to PWFC. That's the first blush was discussed today, but far less than would probably fully occupy that space. So we have talked with SHI, and they've been very amenable to a kind of month-to-month lease as we need it, and so we're working through that with them. But what we are exploring right now is moving some configuration of downtown CBJ staff into Marie Drake for a temporary basis. So this would not affect long-term uses of Marie Drake in the proposal. I think the fear is that a temporary move would become more and more permanent. Parking really is the big issue still in Marie Drake, and so we would have to care for making sure that if we put employees there, they had a parking spot. That's really the limiting factor on how we move those chess pieces around. The other piece that we would need to do during this move is purchase office furniture, because of course they're classrooms, so we would give it a really deep scrub and paint the walls as a very minimum in the select classrooms or office spaces that would house CBJ staff. And we would also purchase some office furniture. Mayor has given us a line on some used furniture that we will certainly follow up on, but the point is some of our furniture is really not even worth moving. And so what we would be doing is purchasing cubicle walls and desk and workstations. And we would make sure that whatever we purchase is neutral enough that it would be part of any long-term City Hall solution, because it's about $10,000 a workstation to buy the walls and the desk and all the things. And I have requested Visitor Industry Director Pierce's design expertise on this decision, so we make sure that it is a long-term purchase. But what that means is I'm giving you an update on the pivot to Marie Drake as a home for some CBJ downtown employees, and the fact that we will be spending City Hall funds on that office furniture. And I just wanted to make sure you were all in the loop as the dynamics of where we work seems to be ever evolving. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any questions? Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I'll try to keep this quick. So I guess just kind of general idea of the timeline. I mean, I imagine staff is still moving out of Marie Drake at this point. Like when would we be moving in there? And then I guess how long do we envision staying there? Like, could we use Harbor View's parking as a temporary solution during the summer, or are we going to be there for longer?
Yeah, those are both great questions. So we presume that office furniture is a couple months of lead time out. Also, JSD they're working hard to get out of Marie Drake. And we went and toured the facility last week, and Superintendent Hauser was like, well, we could get out of like these offices first and then just stage all the stuff over here. So there's definitely some flexibility, and they're trying to work with us. But I have told SHI that we are probably at Anyway for a minimum of 3 additional months. So I don't see us moving any sooner than 3 months. The second question about how long would we be there, when we talk to the Burns building owners about a long-term lease, they're really looking at kind of negotiations being finished in December, and then some tenant improvements and not moving in until spring or summer of next year. So I have extended like the lease at Marine View a whole nother year. So I think we are looking at a year of that temporary occupancy.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there further questions on this subject? Seeing no questions, thank you for that update. Our next meeting date is July 15th, 2024 at 6 p.m. and we are adjourned.